the part where I repeat myself. I'm sorry. This is the part where I repeat myself. I repeat myself.
Morning to you. Good Thursday morning and welcome to Real Talk. Jesperson here with Hoyles and Brooks. That is, and has always been, Ayla Brooke and the Soundmen, the authors and performers of the Real Talk soundtrack. Boy, are we ever lucky to be able to spin tunes with their blessing from their album Desolation Sounds, released by Fallen Tree Records. It's October 21st, and this episode of Real Talk is presented by the team at Bitcoin Well. I often talk to you about Adam O'Brien. He's the founding CEO of Bitcoin Well, but of course there's a big team there. It's a team that's grown in a big way over the past number of years, so much so that they're expanding their footprint. They're actually, I don't know if it's up to me to be making these big announcements. I know that they're going to be making the bigger announcement, but they've got a huge new location under construction in downtown Edmonton, which is super exciting. What it reiterates to me is that staff members, team members, they're like Benny. Benny is my man at Bitcoin Well. See a bright future in speaking with fellow human beings one-on-one, answering questions about cryptocurrency, in particular Bitcoin, also Ethereum, and I mean, there's a ton of them, right? If you have questions, like most people do, may I recommend getting in touch with Benny at Bitcoin Well. You'll find him under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We have a fantastic conversation coming up in approximately, well, about 5 minutes from now. We're going to throw to it. We don't typically do pre-recorded interviews, but when we do, we're not going to bullshit you. It's real talk, and so I'm not going to pretend like we used to pretend. This is what big corporate media does to you, friends. I'm going to pull the curtain back here. I love, like, what are we, 1 minute into the show, and he's already taken big swipes. Well, what do you expect? I've walked in the shoes. They already tried it. They always try to spin it. Like, now we go to, and then as the host, you're like, gosh, I hope the file doesn't get interrupted. I hope the computer doesn't crash while we're pressing play on this pre-recorded interview that we're pretending is live. Here's the deal. Rob Meyerson is the CEO of Delalune Space, and Adam Steltzner is a spacecraft designer who was what was he, like, mission control? He was like basically the quarterback of the Mars Perseverance rover, the 2020 Perseverance rover. Like, unbelievable perspective these two have. And they're going to be sort of co-keynoting. They're delivering a keynote together this weekend on Saturday, October 23rd, out in Jasper as part of the Dark Sky Festival. We're like, well, listen, we have to talk to these two guys about whether or not humanity has a future outside of the limitations of planet Earth. And they had limited availability, so we spent yesterday talking to them, and we're going to roll that interview in just a second. It's so cool. Right? I mean, these are guys literally that are working with talented teams to build rocket ships, to build, obviously, infrastructure and game plans for NASA, but also for private and commercial space travel. 10 or 100 years from now, might it be a normal thing, just another weekend for humans to fly outside of what we've understood to be the limitations of our particular reality in the solar system? Might we, hundreds or thousands of years from now, actually inhabit another planet? What might that look like? I mean, I don't want to oversell the interview, but I don't know that it's possible with an interview like this because it's so cool. And that's coming up in just a second. In about a half an hour from now, we're going to talk to a bioethicist by the name of Florence Ashley. You may have read a piece. There was a column published in the Toronto Star just a couple of days ago. It gained even more notoriety, I think, or at least there was a lot more attention shone upon it when celebrated Canadian author Margaret Atwood pushed it out. She retweeted it. She essentially promoted it to her channels on Twitter. Why can't we say woman anymore? was the headline. Rosie DiMano was the columnist with the Star that wrote it. So we're going to get into this. You may have heard language or people saying people who are pregnant as opposed to women, or you may hear people refer to things like chest feeding as opposed to breastfeeding as an example. It's really been interesting in the few moments since Sarah Hoyles pushed out our tweet from our official Real Talk RJ account announcing that I'd be talking to Florence Ashley today. We've already had some interesting responses from people who are, this is their real life. This is their daily walk, like Nicole, who reached out and said, for example, I can't say mamas, the word mamas, in my mom's group anymore. Nicole says, I was called out on it the other day. And a real talker by the name of Tim said, well, what specifically was the rationale there? And Nicole said, and I know this is going to weird all of you out that there's actually like respectful, open-minded dialogue happening on the internet. You know why? That's because it's among real talkers. Not saying, just saying. But look at this. People seeking to understand one another's perspective and not swearing. I don't know what's going on. Are we turning the internet upside down on this program? So Nicole circles back and said, well, this was in my adoption parents support book club. She says the comment was fair. Though there aren't any male members in the group that I'm aware of. So I don't know. She said, but I do appreciate the person pointing it out to me. I'm looking forward to the conversation with the bioethicist on Real Talk today. Says Nicole, I have some learning to do. I thought, hey, good on you, Nicole. I think the real talk on it is that the average person would probably be inclined to say things that may be offensive to some people and lack the understanding as to why that might be offensive. I think that's fair to say. Language changes. Language evolves. You've seen it here on the show. You see it from time to time with your intrepid host, who oftentimes says things that require a bit of correction or that prompt a bit of follow-up from real talkers. And I think all of us over the past 10, coming up on 11 months. No, wait a second. We're like 2 days shy of our 11-month anniversary. Wow. It's kind of sneaking up on us. Over the past almost a year, we've done some learning on some things, haven't we? I think of my particular, the January 4th show where I was going off script and I quoted that line from Zoolander, wondering is everybody taking crazy pills? And then you remember a real talker by the name of Leah McRory reached out and she came on the show on January 5th. And we did a little bit of learning about ableist language and ableism. We've had moments where, you talk about someone at the top of the totem pole or the bottom of the totem pole. More than anything I learned on that is people, in particular, an Indigenous carver reached out and said, the person at the bottom of the totem pole oftentimes carries the most prestige. The euphemism is actually twisted. It indicates a lack. Said the bottom of the totem pole is not how it's described in the workplace. If you were to say, that guy's at the bottom of the totem pole, the carver says, that's not how it works, you guys. That's another example. There are many examples. Hoyles and I were joking about, I don't know how many of you are watching the show on Apple TV Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon, but there's a big scene there. It doesn't require a spoiler alert. I won't get too into it, but one of the broadcasters on camera gets in hot water talking about his spirit animal. These are the types of things where some people may say, well, is everybody offended about everything these days? And other people may say, as a matter of fact, let me explain to you the background here and why that's something that we don't prefer to hear. Sometimes it makes us uncomfortable. Sometimes we push back. Sometimes we roll our eyes. And sometimes we go, gosh, I never thought of it that way. So I'm looking forward when Florence joins us. I think that this is going to be a great conversation. Florence is a doctoral student at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, Joint Center for Bioethics. You've probably read their work in the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Huffington Post, Montreal Gazette, et cetera, et cetera. And now I always wonder, they get to add, every real talk, the guest gets to say, so they'll say, you may have heard them on like the NBC Nightly News and Al Jazeera and the Globe and Mail and Real Talk. Uh-huh.
Well, did you see that the Reverend, who was on yesterday,
Michael Corrin,
said, I've had, the book has just been flying off the shelves, both online, so literally and figuratively.
That's great.
And he said, because of, and named off all these places.
Yeah.
And Real Talk.
It was great. Yeah, they sold out yesterday, I think, and Reverend Corrin was reminding everybody that said, and they can reprint them. So they're gonna don't lose interest in the book. They're gonna reprint them. I wanted to leave some time for some emails today, and we're going to. I have 5 of them in my hand, and I commit to you. I shouldn't do this. Gosh, I commit to you we're going to read all 5. I've done it. I'm on the record.
Folks, I'm going to keep notes here, and I'm going to keep a tally, make sure we get to 5.
We could do it like as soon as we do one. It's like, one. We need like a dry erase board or like an old school chalkboard. The fans can play along at home. And if I miss one, then we've got to buy everybody drinks or something like that. I mean, I avoided a big commitment. I went on the record 2 years ago and said if Mike Nickel was elected mayor, I'd buy the city of Edmonton lunch. And I was sweating bullets for a little bit. But now, because I was, of course, as a responsible person would, someone who as a child learned about financial literacy. See what I'm doing there, Hoyles? I had, of course, been putting money away in my separate savings account to buy lunch for the city of Edmonton. No, I'm just kidding. You know what my plan was actually? I was just going to step up and say, all right, everybody, step up to the table. Come eat your shit sandwich. Congratulations on the... But no. What we're talking about with kids and financial literacy... If you know me, you know that we can segue from one thing to anything. I'm also looking forward to an hour and 17 minutes from now when Pam Liyanage joins us, the co-founder of MoneyPrep. She has a 25-year background in the financial services industry, but perhaps more importantly, she's a mother of 4. And they've just developed a new app. It's a video game app to teach kids about money management. I think this is going to be great. You talk to anybody, not anybody, but this is a commonly recurring theme when people talk about curriculum. Most especially, I think, in junior high and high school, but it's never too early to start learning. And people always say we do not teach young people enough about financial literacy. I mean, how are you learning about Genghis Khan and the Silk Road in grade 2, but we're not learning about compounding interest and credit card debt until it's too late oftentimes for some people? Doesn't make any sense. So that conversation's coming up as well. Let me get to an email before we get to our out-of-this-world interview with Rob and Adam. Lauren was in touch with us yesterday to talk at ryanjesperson.com. She said, wow, the show is on fire this week. She said, Reverend Michael Corrin sure had some interesting ideas on your show, Ryan, and I completely agree that Jesus was a revolutionary thinker whose teachings and fame were a serious threat to the status quo. Lauren says, for the record and for context, I am not and have never been a Christian. But when you started talking abortion, she said the so-called pro-life movement always puzzled me because it seems unconcerned with what happens to the woman or to the person, right, Hoyles? To the person or to her child once it's born. It doesn't seem very Christian to me. And when you and the Reverend Corrin were talking about abortion, it reminded me why women, says Lauren, need to be included in that conversation. That anti-abortion movement is not pro-life, Ryan, it's pro-birth. They don't care about the born. They want to punish women for having sex and keep poor women in their place. Lauren says Arwa Madawi writes a weekly column in The Guardian called The Week in Patriarchy. And she wrote about this very issue within recent memory, and I'd recommend that Real Talkers check it out. Lauren says, I would love to see more discussion around language in this context on your show. Lauren says, it's been interesting to watch your journey, Ryan, around the use of language since you started the show. This is another issue where the words that we use are important and powerful. And then she signs off this. I read this one, her sign off a couple of times. She said, the show keeps getting bigger and better. Keep it up, but please don't get too big and wreck the magic. I thought that was an interesting comment. How about this? We'll keep getting bigger, but we'll do whatever it takes to keep the magic. That's the promise we'll make. I promise you that, Lauren. I promise you. Coming up in just a second, can and will human beings live and exist beyond planet Earth? That coming up in just a moment. But before we get there, let me remind you that just because the leaves are falling or fall in, depending on how strong the wind has blown through your street or depending on where you're tuning in, I don't think our regular listeners in Costa Rica are worried about this at all. I don't think that our friends that are tuning in from Hawaii, and thank you for that, we see you online, I don't think that you're concerned about that. But if you're in our neck of the woods, you know that typically you don't associate winter with landscape construction. But Eden Landscaping's got a ton of experience with that, whether it's building a pergola, an outdoor cook station, or even one of these 3-season rooms that are really the rage right now. Expand the footprint of your home, more space for you and your family to spend together in a 3-season room. They've been doing these for more than 20 years. You can get in touch with Mike and his team for a quote at landscapeedmonton.ca, and you can find them absolutely anytime. I reached out to Chris Kozowski from Park Power the other day, and I said, hey, you know, a lot of people are telling us that they're signing up. I said, but every time we mention a new perk or a new benefit or a new reason to check out parkpower.ca, we get even more interest. And he said, well, here's something really interesting to mention to Real Talkers. At parkpower.ca right now, they got a blog post up on natural gas rates. He says the point of this is for us to put some informative material out there. And he says that a lot of people are paying attention to natural gas rates on the rise. You know, if you're in Western Canada, if you're in Alberta in particular, in the context of Park Power, he says you got to keep in mind that we're still in a pretty luxurious position. Despite the mainstream media talk, he says if you take a look at some of those natural gas rates around the world, it's important to have some context. So you can check out the blog link at parkpower.ca, and a reminder, if and when you take your business there, make sure you use the promo code 2021-REALTALK to save $70 off your first bill. Our friends at Tourism Jasper this weekend, wrapping up on Sunday, will mark the conclusion of another successful Dark Sky Festival. Saturday, a big part of that is a keynote speech delivered by two of the trailblazers when it comes to space exploration. We're bringing this interview to you now for the first time. We recorded it yesterday afternoon with Rob Meyerson, the CEO of Delalune Space, and Adam Steltzner, a spacecraft designer. We've been telling you for the past while, it's a big weekend coming up in one of our favorite places on planet Earth. We're talking, of course, about Jasper National Park. The Dark Sky Festival is underway, running through till October 24th. Saturday, October 23rd, not to be missed, as the festival welcomes two keynote speakers to tackle one of the biggest questions ever, the future of humanity on planet Earth. It's a real pleasure to welcome to the program those two keynote speakers ahead of their address on Saturday afternoon in Jasper. Rob Meyerson, CEO of Delalune Space, former president of Blue Origin, and Adam Steltzner, spacecraft designer and an author and innovator, and chief engineer of NASA's Mars 2020 Perseverance mission. Gentlemen, it's a thrill to have you joining us. Welcome to Real Talk. Thanks for making time.
You bet. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
These are the types of questions that people, amateurs like me, ask ourselves as we gaze off into space, oftentimes around a campfire. I wonder where humanity might wind up. I wonder what might force us off planet Earth. I wonder if we might be able to survive elsewhere. Rob, you first. You're taking the question head on.
I will take it head on. Yeah, I think we are ready to start looking at, even just in the last few months, we've seen the growth of commercial human spaceflight, and I think we're ready to start having regular people, non-professional astronauts, experience space and help to share that experience with others. So much like we're hearing from William Shatner here just in the last few days. So.
I know this is such a timely conversation, and I'm grateful to have you here. I want to ask you about William Shatner. I want to ask you about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and I want to ask you about the hundreds of millions of people on planet Earth who would at least entertain the idea of space travel in one context or another. Adam, was that kind of the impetus? I mean, the big picture impetus of the Perseverance mission, the rover that's on Mars as we speak, to explore the potential of human life there on the red planet?
Well, the big impetus, of course, for all of us is this human drive to explore, which is fundamentally an expression of our humanity. For our rover, for Perseverance, her main goal is to actually take samples of the surface of Mars for return to Earth so that we can understand the history of Mars and peel back the layers of the onion and see if Mars was ever alive, if life ever started on Mars. We know that 3.5 billion years ago, when life was just starting here on Earth, the conditions to support life were ripe on Mars. So was it alive? Is there evidence of life? These are the questions that Perseverance is trying to answer.
So, Rob, when we talk about human life or life outside of the context or the environment of planet Earth, do we automatically go to Mars? I mean, I'm approaching this, to be quite honest, from a high school level of understanding of space. All right, so you're going to have to treat some of these questions maybe at a layperson's level. But is Mars the obvious one to go to?
Well, I think it is. I think it's the planet that we most think about as having the potential of supporting human life. So it's natural to go to Mars, but Mars is a long way away. It's 6 to 8 months away with current technology. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to practice and gain experience with living off Earth in low Earth orbit and on the moon. And Adam and I have many discussions about this. And it's I think Mars is the ultimate, not the end, but an ultimate destination. But I think going to the moon and getting settled there is a great first step and a logical first step for us and for humankind, because space is an extreme environment. And it's really hard to work in an extreme environment. So we have to learn about living and working in space before I think it's realistic to send dozens or even more people to the surface of Mars.
So Adam, when you and Rob and others are talking about this at a high level, or at least as a high level of understanding as you can have at this point, what are some of the hurdles that would stand in the way of humankind broadening its own horizon, so to speak?
Well, one of the many challenges, of course, is that we evolved on this planet. And so we are connected to Earth in more ways. Well, I'll make the assertion we're connected to Earth in more ways than we understand today. Yeah. We are creatures of this environment. Our bodies work in harmony with the Earth environment. So we would need to be making Mars as Earth-like and bringing lots of Earth with us, frankly, lots of microorganisms with us. We would need to be looking to make Mars as livable as possible. And so that would start by bringing habitats in which we can have plants and dirt and animals similar to those that we have here on Earth to supply us with the necessary environmental surroundings.
Yeah, because let's just to state the obvious here, but I'd love to know how the two of you would approach the answer. Evolution over the course of millions and millions and millions and millions of years, if you're talking about humanity's ability to survive on Mars or elsewhere, you'd either have to talk about imposing our favorable environment there or some sort of a hyperspeed evolution, which I'm quite certain that's not exactly how it works. So the options are limited.
Right. And there's a lot of radiation at Mars compared to Earth. Mars has lost its magnetic field because it cooled. And so it's dynamo. Here on Earth, we've got this molten core and a magnetic field, and that magnetic field shelters us from the radiation environment of the sun and protects our atmosphere from being swept away by the solar winds. That doesn't happen on Mars, so you have a much more diffuse atmosphere. You have a much higher radiation environment, and so it's not a great place to live today, and it will be thousands of years before it is a great place to live, or maybe tens of thousands of years. But we could live there in habitats, and we could construct settlements. It would be living indoors. And we would want to make those indoors environments as habitable and as desirable a place to live as possible.
So are we talking about this? And Rob, I don't mean to step on your toes. I'll let you take the baton here and run with it. But are we talking about this as a last resort? In other words, as humanity, we've destroyed planet Earth to the point that climate change and other factors make the planet uninhabitable, and we've got to go somewhere else. Or are there other reasons behind this type of exploration?
Yeah, I don't think of it that way. Think about it that way, Ryan. It's not the doomsday scenario. I think if we don't do anything, if we don't do anything about what our impacts here on planet Earth, there will be that. But I do think we have decades, if not a century or so, to to get ourselves ready. And one thing I'd like to add to what Adam's saying is living on Mars in these, early days, whether that's decades or, 30 to 50 years out in habitats, we're going to require having robots there and autonomy. Those, so when people talk about robotic versus human exploration, I really think about it being both, because our astronauts that are living on Mars in this remote environment that's months away from Earth are going to need significant levels of autonomous systems and robots to help them survive, to do things that are just going to be too difficult for a human to do, to suit up and go outside and do. So
you've had, Rob, what an incredible insight you have as former president of Blue Origin. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the company's basically been innovating and exploring opportunities in and around commercial and even civilian space travel, a privately funded exercise, and a lot of, really cool stuff for people that follow along. I think people are being led to believe, myself included, that public opportunities, civilian opportunities around space travel are upon us. How close are we to that? And how much further down the field does the ball move when a high-profile celebrity, like most recently William Shatner, and there have been others, spends 10 minutes up there, 4 minutes with, without the effects of gravity? What does that do to further the public interest and fascination?
Well, I think it's the obvious when a celebrity like William Shatner does go up. The words that, what they can share to a much broader audience. So that megaphone is much more effective when you have a celebrity. And I think that we are, as far as like how quickly, how soon, we're coming to open up the space frontier to others. It's happening now, but we're still at the very, very early stages. The prices are still high. It's not a price that many of us can afford. But when you see a mission like William Shatner's mission last week, or the Inspiration 4 mission a few weeks before that, where you see everyday folks having the opportunity to experience space and share that with others, I think it's going to start to accelerate how people are inspired by it, and how they think about their position in the future of the space industry. I think that's we're just beginning to see that impact, and I'm very excited about it. So obviously,
I don't know how you can't be. I don't even know really where to cap my imagination on this, and maybe the point is that we shouldn't. And then at the same time, I recognize and acknowledge that my imagination probably doesn't even know where to begin, because my level of comprehension and understanding of all this is so limited. And that's why I think there's such a public thirst for this. Adam, right before I talked to the two of you, I popped in, I thought, I wonder how many people watch these NASA video updates of the Perseverance rover. I wonder how many people subscribe to the NASA YouTube channel. It's millions, like millions of people.
Tens of millions
are interested in this type of thing. How much have we learned about Mars, or how much has our understanding of it deepened as a result of, the Perseverance rover or other fact-finding missions?
Well, our understanding of Mars has completely been rewritten almost every time we go there, with every successive mission. We first went in the 70s with the Viking missions, and we thought we would see rodents scurrying across the surface of Mars. The people involved were really certain that they wanted to have lights to turn on at night to see the rodents scurrying across the surface of Mars. The Mars we found in the 70s looked desolate and dead. The Mars we've been back to is apparently desolate and dead, although what we learned in 2004 is that at one point it had been very wet. And Curiosity in 2012, another one of these nuclear-powered mega rovers like Perseverance, she taught us that when it was wet, 3.5 billion years ago, the conditions to support life were ripe on the surface of Mars. It was a wet, lush environment that would support life. So Perseverance is there, landed this year, to take samples of Mars and bring them back to Earth to help us understand if there is evidence of past life on the surface of Mars.
How did the two of you, how did this journey begin? Rob? Like, well, what did 7 or 8 or 10-year-old Rob dream about? What did he think about when he looked up to the constellations?
Well, I'll go back a few. A 5-year-old Rob, I remember, was playing in a cardboard mock-up of the lunar lander in the kitchen of my home. 10-year-old Rob was starting to launch rockets out of the front driveway of my house, and thinking about, where I might fit in this future industry. And then, of course, just 10 years later, I was a co-op student at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, working for NASA while I was in college. So, I say, think big, keep your options open and really seek out. I think the importance of mentoring, seeking out a mentor and finding a mentor who can help you get where you want to go are some key points that I think benefited me over my career.
No kidding. We're going to have a bunch of people listening to this on the podcast, but for the benefit of the people watching on YouTube, Sam, can you call that photo up again of Adam? Adam, it looks to me like this. I think this is in Mission Control. Tell us about this. Like, you look like a football coach that's just just saw his quarterback throw the winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. I mean, what's going through your mind at this point?
This is Curiosity Landing. This landing night for Curiosity in 2012, and these are the first images, thumbnail pictures of the surface of Mars, taken by the Curiosity rover moments after touchdown, and this is us reacting to them on the screen as they come down. The numbers, the ones and zeros that come down and tell you that the rover's done its job, they are hard to connect with. And they don't have the impact that the first images from a new place in our solar system have on the team that made those images possible.
Absolutely unbelievable stuff. And you know that you're going to have a captive audience when people are showing up. And have either of you been to Jasper National Park before, by the way?
I never have.
Oh,
I was there 2 years ago. Yes. Yeah.
So you know what to expect, Rob. I mean, it's a dark sky preserve, and it's just, I had a chance to be out at the planetarium there just a couple of months ago, and it's wondrous, even for a pleb like me. You know what I mean? To be able to start to wrap your minds around these things and stuff that's old hat maybe to you guys because of your line of work and your expertise and all this, but I guess I'm even used to assuming that those big old telescopes are going to be maneuvered by someone who's going to be finding the proper, focal settings so I can go. No, I mean, they're running these telescopes, as computer controlled. I mean, people have telescopes all around the world. I heard a story about a guy that controls his telescopes from his home in Maine, and he's got telescopes down in the southern hemisphere. I mean, even the civilian interest here and the capabilities of people to explore space, including, for example, at this Dark Sky Festival, are really, really remarkable. You could say, like, the age of space interest has never had more promise for the average person.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's a wonderful time to be looking to the heavens.
Yeah, it's a wonderful time, and it's a wonderful audience up in Jasper. So I'm looking forward to going back.
So cool. So it's coming up this Saturday, October 23rd. The two of you will be speaking in the afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Jasper Activity Center, and tickets are available for just $20. You can check out our website in partnership with Tourism Jasper, jasper.travel/Real Talk, if you'd like to know more about tickets. Fellas, just in closing, I know I should end on a positive note, but maybe I'll end with just a reminder of some of the things that we're capable of here as human beings. We've spent the week talking about the Fairy Creek blockades, people trying to stop logging at old-growth forests, and of course, we were talking just a couple of weeks ago about a pipeline rupture that was having implications off the coast of California, and we understand more about climate change more now than we have ever before. Do you think we as humans are hardwired to have a negative impact on whichever planet we colonize? Or do you think that maybe a transition over the course of maybe the next 10,000 years, if that's what it takes, do you think it might reset human tendency?
I think it has to. I think we're smart enough. We haven't previously really had to watch what we do and take care of how we behave. But we are so successfully dominant here on Earth that our success is becoming our failure. And we're going to have to strike a balance, a conscious balance of equilibrium. We will be the first species on Earth to ever do that. I can't imagine it will be the first species in the universe to have ever done it, but I think that time is coming upon us now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Rob?
I couldn't agree more with Adam, but I'd also say that we're a species that can learn from the past, and we can learn a lot from our understandings and our observations from space. So impacts on climate change, we can learn about those things greatly from the technologies and other things that we put in space to look back on Earth. So, but I couldn't agree more with Adam. So,
guys, there's human beings elsewhere, right? Humans.
There's life elsewhere. There's no doubt about that. If you put numbers in what's called the Drake equation, you come up to the conclusion that it is impossible that there isn't life elsewhere in our universe.
Yeah. Maybe we'll still be here when we find out that much more about it. I don't know. If so, it's going to be in part to the work done by experts like the both of you. We're really thrilled to have been able to have a chance to check in with you. I just even preparing for this conversation had so much fun reading up on what the two of you are doing alongside your talented colleagues. Rob Meyerson, of course, the CEO of Delalune Space, former president of Blue Origin, and Adam Steltzner joining us, chief engineer of NASA's Mars 2020 Perseverance mission, a spacecraft designer, author, and innovator, both of them delivering a keynote together this Saturday in Jasper. Again, our website, jasper.travel/Real Talk. Fellas, thanks for helping us dream big today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Yep.
Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed that. And our thanks again to Rob Meyerson and Adam Steltzner. Enjoy the trip out to Jasper if you're headed out there this Saturday as they wrap up Dark Sky Festival, an amazing weekend in store. If you're traveling beyond Jasper, if you're going to be flying out of Edmonton International Airport, maybe you're looking for a sunny locale. You'd like to stretch your legs, see the sun hit your face, maybe get a little sand between your toes near the end of October. You can't do that everywhere. You know where you can do it. Walk around in a t-shirt and shorts. Non-stop service from Edmonton to Hollywood Burbank this winter. How cool is that? Go see what do they call it? The Hollywood Star Walk? What's it called? The Walk of Stars? The Star Walk? The Star Walk of Fame? We should know the answer to this. I think it's time for another trip to Hollywood.
That's exactly what that means.
It's time for another trip to Hollywood. Team retreat! Woo-hoo! COVID's been messing with us. We haven't had a Real Talk team retreat yet. We're going to have to do something about that, I think. If we do, and we're flying out of EIA, you know where we're going to park our cars. We're going to park them at Jet Set Parking. And before we go, we're going to go to jetsetparking.com and reserve our parking, because if you use the promo code REALTALK, either with or without a space, either with or without, we got you covered, Real Talkers. The promo code REALTALK will get you parking for $8 a day for any travel by the end of 2022, like a year and 2 months from now. How great is that? The promo code REALTALK online at jetsetparking.com. Also wanted to take a quick second to remind you that our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park are getting super excited about Thursday, October 28th. That's a week from today. It's Miracle Treat Day. And that's when all Blizzard sales are going to be donated to the Stollery Children's Hospital. Not all profits. The entire amount donated to the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation from the Dairy Queens. They do it a little bit different at these five. The Dairy Queens of Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. I know they don't want me using their spots to pick fights with other Dairy Queens. That's not the point. But a lot of the Dairy Queens use the proceeds. These guys, like they use the profits. These guys use the whole shebang, and it's meant in past years 6-figure donations to the Stollery. They would blush. Mark and Michael and Michelle would blush, the ownership group, if they heard me talking about that 6-figure thing, but it's relevant. And that's why we're so proud to partner with them. Thursday, October 28th, they're taking pre-orders and they'll deliver for free if the orders are big enough. So if you want to help people out, hook people up with a blizzard, who doesn't love a blizzard? Next Thursday is a great time to do it. Well, there was a column in the Toronto Star It was published on Friday, written by Rosie DiMano, a star columnist. Why can't we say woman anymore? Margaret Atwood, celebrated Canadian author, pushed it out from her Twitter, and that got even more people talking about what was already certainly prompting a lot of discussion. The column opens, "You make me feel like a natural person with a vagina. Man, I feel like a person who menstruates. Oh, pretty person with a cervix. Apologies to Aretha Franklin, Shania Twain, and Roy Orbison, but this appears to be where we're heading if language radicals get their way." That from Rosie DiMano. You know, the mandate of Real Talk is to explore different angles and different perspectives, and we're so grateful that bioethicist Florence Ashley has agreed to join us to talk about this. Based out of Toronto, they're a doctoral student at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, the Joint Centre for Bioethics, and you've likely read Florence's work, public writing in the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the Huffington Post, and elsewhere, making their Real Talk debut. Welcome to the show, and it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, are you as you're reading this lead by Rosie DiMano? It's enough to prompt a smirk. It's a creative lead, but I suspect you're probably going to take issue with the premise. So, what did you make of this assertion? You can't say woman anymore.
I mean, there's a bit of irony considering that, there's the claim that we can't say woman anymore because of trans community. And yet so many people in the trans community are trans women and very much, pointing out that they are indeed women and would like to be referred as such. The reality is that there's really no effort to erase the word woman. People are just asking to also account for the fact that in many contexts, women are not the only people who are concerned, and that a language that also includes them would be preferable.
So when you see a column like this in the Toronto Star, is it something where you say, okay, this will prompt conversation? I mean, in part, it's why you're here on this show. The door would have been open anyway, but it's what prompted us to reach out to you. Is it a good thing in the sense that it's putting this debate or perhaps this progress on people's radar? Or does it feel to you, when a national columnist takes this on in the spirit that they did, does it feel to you like a step backward?
I think it's perhaps less a step backward than a hinder to progress. But the unfortunate part is that, you have this opinion that's kind of quite misleading in many ways. For instance, admonishing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the United States for using menstruating bodies or bodies who menstruate. I can't say I quite remember which terminology was used, but, and then claiming that erases women, completely forgetting the fact that in the actual speech where she said that, she spoke specifically about women and people who menstruate. So women were not at all erased. Both were mentioned. It was simply an acknowledgement that trans men and non-binary people who are assigned female at birth may also need to have access to abortion. And, that also didn't stop her from mentioning the misogyny of restrictions on abortion. So it's really a bit of a misleading attack in this regard. And the unfortunate part of that is that this sort of, if you don't know what is happening, it's quite reasonable to be alarmed by a column like this. But then the problem is that the corrections and, the voices of trans people who are like, whoa, that's not what's actually happening. This is not actually what's happening, don't get heard nearly as much, especially when you have people like Margaret Atwood sharing a perspective that is kind of hostile to trans inclusion, and doubly more so when the reality of social media means that these positions are kind of like resisting change, are always going to be shared more because people are fearful of change, which is understandable to a certain degree. But that's precisely why we need people to talk about this in a kind of more careful manner, in a more in a less misleading way.
We had an interesting response. As soon as we announced, Florence, that you were going to be joining us on the show today, an audience member in good faith tweeted at us and said, I can't say mamas, the word mamas, in my mom's group anymore. And I was called out on it the other day. And Nicole went on to say the comment was fair, said there aren't any male members in the group that I'm aware of, but I do appreciate this person pointing it out to me. I'm looking forward to Florence on the show today. I have some learning to do. So let's begin for the average person that may say, hang on, wait a second, why can't you say mamas at the Mom's Book Club? Help us do some learning here. What's the important point or points to consider?
Yeah, so the reality is, like, oftentimes, first of all, you don't necessarily know who is there and what their gender identity is, especially if it's not, if it's among friends, obviously you usually do, so that's fine, But in other contexts, you might not know how people identify, and you might have people who don't consider themselves to be mothers, who are trans men, or who are non-binary people. Like most of the time, people look at me and think I'm a woman. I don't. And I don't consider myself a woman. I use they, them pronouns. So it's really more just of and really the emphasis is not so much on don't say mothers, it's don't only say mothers when you're referring to a group of people that may very well include people who are not mothers, because you will have people who are, for instance, transgender men who will be pregnant, who will go through a lot of, obstetric discrimination, a lot of, it tend to have asymmetrical parenthood obligations and things like that. And then sort of facing many of the same issues as people in these groups, so want to join them because there's nowhere else, and then enter a group and then get called mothers when they've already had to fight for their respect of their identity so long, and especially in this context where there's a lot of discrimination in the healthcare system when it comes to, pregnant fathers, which can be quite an issue. So you're kind of compounding that difficulty, and you're also reminding them of the fact that, they face all of that discrimination. They're trying to find a safe space to discuss their difficulties, and now they have nothing.
Florence, yesterday was International Pronouns Day, and I saw a bunch of people commenting on it on social media. If there were to be one or perhaps a couple of takeaways from that, let me rephrase the question. Let me start again. If you had your choice to shine the spotlight on something for all humanity to see on International Pronouns Day, what would you want that takeaway to be?
I think in terms of pronouns, it's important not to assume that there's any sort of correspondence between what people look like and the pronouns that they use and the gender identity that they have. People of every appearance can use any pronouns. So it's important not to assume and to simply ask, and also for your own. So, that's what we see a lot is, when I'm working the healthcare field and I'm training people in the healthcare field, what we suggest is, if you're a doctor, you say, hi, I'm Dr. Ashley. I use they, them pronouns. And then you're inviting the other person to just share their own. It's really just kind of the same as learning people's name. You learn their name and you learn their pronouns.
I want to ask you about a couple of, there have been several celebrity incidents, can we call them, in the past number of days, certainly past number of weeks, and even in months past. I'm of course talking about Margaret Atwood just a couple of days ago, J.K. Rowling, the author behind the Harry Potter series, one of the best-selling authors in the history of planet Earth, in a tweet that got her, as Rosie DiMano writes in The Star, that got her, quote, bludgeoned by the mob, when J.K. Rowling tweeted, people who menstruate. I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Wumbin, wimpund, woomud, trying to be cute, I guess. Got her in a world of trouble, certainly. And then, of course, there's what's going on right now with Netflix and the most recent special by Dave Chappelle. Do these types of high-profile stories or incidents or developments encourage you in the sense that society's talking about it? There's conversations happening? There's perceived progress, or no?
Unfortunately, I don't think so, because I think a lot of those people end up being sort of like a kind of like a point, a rallying point for polarization and for people who oppose, trans inclusion, and oftentimes it comes from a place of either, misunderstanding or callousness, which is quite unfortunate. And the problem is, not only do these people are coming from wherever they're coming from, but they're also kind of sharing that to the world and communicating to others that it's okay to just make these kind of like snappy statements without actually understanding the reality of trans people and what is actually going on. And like for instance with J.K. Rowling, it was again a case of where you had somebody who chose to use that word to be inclusive and then gets railed on by J.K. Rowling. And then, if anybody's getting bludgeoned to death, it's the people that are being kind of like quote tweeted by J.K. Rowling and now has all of her fans going after them. And in terms of bludgeoning to death, I mean, if being J.K. Rowling or Dave Chappelle is what being bludgeoned to death is like, I mean, I want to be bludgeoned to death. That sounds fantastic because they have huge audiences and so much money. And a lot of that is just giving them free publicity by yes, a lot of people are criticizing them, but a lot of people are also reactionarily just kind of like standing behind them because they don't really like trans people and don't really like trans movements. So they decide now J.K. Rowling's their favorite author. Now Dave Chappelle's their favorite comedian.
I see. Right. An interesting statement from a beloved Canadian and can I say multi Emmy Award winning producer, writer, actor, Dan Levy, a statement here standing in solidarity with the Netflix employees that are pushing back on the Dave Chappelle special, The Closer. And essentially Dan Levy saying, like, this is not a debate. I stand with every employee at Netflix using their voice to ensure a safe and supportive work environment. He says he's seen it firsthand how vital television can be when it comes to influencing cultural conversations, that the impact is real and that it works both ways, positively and negatively. Says Dan Levy in this statement, transphobia is unacceptable and harmful. That isn't a debate. How big of a deal is that?
I think that's great, and I think that's quite right. I mean, there's a certain irony in the claim that was initially made and now kind of partly retracted by the co-CEO of Netflix that, comedy has no, real world impact, because comedy as an art form has always been predicated on having a real world impact. It was always a way to, shake power, make people think. And so to then start claiming that, oh no, it's apolitical, it has no real world impact, as soon as it's deciding to, spend half an hour bashing trans people's bit, is quite a bit ironic and kind of runs counter to everything we know about the entertainment industry. People's thoughts on topics don't come just out of nowhere. They're not God-given coming down from the sky. People get their ideas somewhere. And when you have a huge show that's, in your kind of Netflix top recommended, the hottest in Canada list, and that spends, half an hour making fun of trans people, then obviously you're going to think, well, I guess making fun of trans people is really okay, and their life issues, I guess, can't be that bad.
An interesting comment here from Jill, who says, quote, women and people who menstruate is fine. The problem is when articles just refer to all of us as bleeders or menstruators or gestational bodies. Jill says most articles do not use women and. Is women and people who menstruate to you an inclusive statement? And let me ask you, is that an acceptable statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And also that was what was said in the by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Now, different people make different editorial choices when they are writing things. I don't personally think that there's any issue with saying like people who menstruate in a certain context, but I also see a lot of, women and other people who menstruate. And I don't think it's quite true that there's like a clear dominance of one over the other. I just think that one gets certainly a lot more of pushback. With that said, there's a kind of a there's a certain irony in the Canadian context of this kind of resistance to the kind of person who language, given that we still have the Governor General Award in commemoration of the person's case. And one of the biggest feminist victories in Canada was precisely this inclusion as persons and this shift in language for women being included in persons. So I think there's a bit of irony, and I certainly understand the concern about, women being erased. But when we look at the entire context, it's also a question of, when does it matter and when does it matter less? And so, for instance, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was talking about the Texas bill prohibiting abortion, she talked about women, she talked about misogyny. Why? Because these bills are deeply sexist, deeply misogynistic, and are really coming from this kind of white patriarchal mindset. When you're talking about, when you're writing in a in a scientific article where you have a strict word count, and like the Lancet, and the word counts are brutal at the Lancet, having submitted there in the past, you're gonna go shorter, and I don't think that's necessarily an issue.
You can find more about what Florence Ashley does, bioethicist, by visiting their website, florenceashley.com. You can follow them on Twitter @ButNotTheCity. Florence, thanks for making time for us today. We appreciate it.
Pleasure. Have a great day.
You got it. I appreciate the comments online too. I mean, the live chat right now, there's when's the last time, I know I keep saying this, but and I'm not going to, I guess, obsess over it, but where else on the internet? And don't go looking for it because you will become disillusioned, discouraged, and appalled. Where else on the internet are you finding a respectful conversation about pronouns, language, gender? I mean, can I just say for a second, I'm proud of you, Real Talkers. It means a lot to me. Not everybody is going to see eye to eye on these things. Not everybody's going to understand things to the same depth, at the same level. And it just means a lot to us to see these conversations happening. Dylan, who's joining us now, I saw in the live chat, said, it'd be really neat is on Real Talk if the fonts, where you see the things coming up on the screen if you watch us on Real Talk. Dylan said in addition to like the guests' social media handles and their website, if you could put their pronouns in there. I wanted to address that. And I wanted to let you know that while you may not see it in the guest font, it is part of our production process. And behind the scenes, when Sarah Hoyles is corresponding with our guests, that is one of the things that we ask the guest, is their preferred pronouns. And so you will hear me using their preferred pronouns in the interview, though it may not come up. Why are you looking at me right now like you're nervous about this?
I'm just nervous that the idea of preferred pronoun, people say don't use preferred pronoun, say pronoun, because that's their pronoun.
Sure, like people saying back in the day, don't say sexual preference.
Yeah.
Like that was church language. What's your sexual preference? People always say, yeah, hey, listen, if somebody makes the choice to be gay, that's none of my business. And you're like, well, it's not really a choice. Fair enough. Point taken, Hoyles. This is reason number 6,429 why we're lucky to have Hoyles on our team. But I wanted to address the fact that Dylan suggested it, and I wanted to let you know the wheels are already in motion on that. And we appreciate the perspective. And we love when you have suggestions on things that you think that we could do or things we could do to make the show better, including becoming more inclusive. And that's something that's really important to us, and it's a top priority to us for reasons that are obvious and may not be. Sometimes it's personal for us. Sometimes it's bigger picture, and a lot of times it's prompted by your correspondence to the show, including emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Jesse Wente coming up in just a second. I am so excited to have Jesse on the program. First, I wanted to take a quick second to remind you how proud we are to partner with the team at Grand Dog Essentials Quality Raw Food. You know, if you use the promo code REALTALK at granddog.ca, you'll get 10% off your first-time order delivered to your door. Check this out, a customer testimonial. Absolutely love this one. The team at Grand Dog passed this along to us. They said, we think you're going to like this one. They said, this is from a family. This is from a customer. It says, we rescued Tyson last December with the knowledge that he had allergies and had to have him on a select diet and manage it. And the vet told us he needed to be on this hydrolyzed protein kibble. They prescribed to limit some skin conditions, a perpetual rash, That's a great band name, Perpetual Rash. Anyway, Tyson fully rejected the food and he was refusing to eat. And so they switched to a limited ingredient diet without his allergies to see how it would work. And he loved it, they said. So hoping to find food that he would stick to permanently, we took a shot on going raw. And we found Grand Dog Essentials. Your product absolutely changed how Tyson ate. He was ecstatic for meal times. His big jowls really soak up our kitchen floors. Beside his eating habits, his rash cleared up in a week. The smell was gone. His coat is vastly healthier than before. He's been eating Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food for 6 months now, is loving it. Says Tyson's human best friend, I just wanted to thank you. We can't recommend you guys enough to people. Most people stay with what's working for them, but I will sing Grand Dog's praises every chance I get. I love it, Tyson. Such a good boy. 10% off with the promo code REALTALK at granddog.ca. The overbite on those is just so... Isn't that the best?
The teeths. The little teeths.
Look at that dog. Such a good dog. I love we just like do these like bizarre ad reads and then we're just like right back to business. Here we go. If you pay attention to, like informed thought, reasoned dialogue, challenging conversations, including those around reconciliation, I probably don't have to tell you, Canada, that there's a brand new book out that from the minute it was released, already a national bestseller, Unreconciled, Family Truth and Indigenous Resistance. It's written by Jesse Wente, an Anishinaabe writer, a broadcaster, an arts leader, the member of the Serpent River First Nation, and chair of the Canada Council for the Arts in 2020. Jesse, we're thrilled to have you joining us here on the show. A warm welcome to you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Ryan.
Unreconciled. It may be commentary on the state of the nation, but with your opener, I mean, when you talk about yourself standing over home plate 10 years old, it's personal testimony as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that was the idea, was that the title was meant to represent both my feelings about the country that is currently called Canada and myself. And I would say both of those are in a ongoing process of reconciliation.
Can you tell our audience members that may not have had a chance yet to get their hands on the book about that experience yourself as a 10-year-old boy? I mean, you write, quote, "This was the exact moment I learned I was an Indian."
Sure. Like so many kids who grew up I assume like so many kids who grow up today, I played in a, neighborhood little league softball league. And, all the kids would play, Ryan. Like it was one of those where it was what everyone did during the summer. And so we played for years. My dad was a coach. My sister played. My parents would come and watch the games. My grandparents, who lived across the street from us in the same neighborhood, would often come watch the games when they could. And it was a really nondescript game. I don't remember anything else really about this particular game, but this incident, which I was coming up to plate. I was a decent player. I wouldn't say, I'm obviously not playing professionally, so I wasn't that good. And the kids, as you would find at a neighborhood softball league game, they would, taunt the opposing team. And typically, we want a pitcher, not a belly itcher, was about as harsh as it got, Ryan. I mean, it is a damning indictment to want to say someone is a belly itcher. I understand. I mean, it's
what could be worse?
Oh, I mean, horrible rebuke. But so, we were very used to it and, very normal. Every team did it. But at this particular time when I came up to bat, they made a noise that was, pardon the pun, reserved very specifically for myself, which is they war whooped in the manner of, it's not a human sound, really. It's a sound that belongs to Saturday morning cartoons of my childhood and Western movies of a certain era. And so they made this war whooping sound. And, when I write in the book that this is the moment I understood I was an Indian, I should be clear. It's the moment I understood that that's how people would view me as an Indian. I knew I was Anishinaabe and Ojibwe. I've never not known those things. But it was I think the first conscious moment where it sunk in that people were going to assume and think things about me based on this identity that really was not at all what I understood about my identity. I've never heard that noise. My family's never made that noise, never heard that in my community. At this point in my life, I've now been all over the world in First Nations communities all over the world. Never heard that once. So, and yet for those kids, and I think it's important as I write in the book, no one stopped this. No adult at the time went, oh, that's terrible. My parents were likely at the game. They never brought it up. Like, it was not something they really talked about. In fact, my grandmother, who was Norma Miyawasaki, who's, where my Anishinaabe roots come from, she might have been at that game. It never came up, which I grant is a sort of maybe something of the time. Because when this did happen recently, as I also write in the book, there was a hockey game, a hockey tournament in 2018, when a team called the First Nations Elites were playing in Quebec. And when they took the ice, they heard the exact same sound I would have heard more than 30 years previous. This time, though, it became a national news story. People did say things. The parents of the players spoke out. So that was certainly a difference. But the idea that, it was for some an acceptable noise to be made, but also that still may have been all they knew of Indigenous people. Because one of the things that sticks out to me is here the kids were making this noise at me, maybe the only thing they actually thought they knew about Indigenous people. And yet here was a living, breathing Indigenous person in the game with them that they could have, asked about or done anything, recognize that I had never made that noise around them. But they didn't. And so I think I led the book because it was a moment that I returned to. I don't remember anything of those games, but I do remember that sound, which I think is important for people to realize. These aren't inconsequential things that happen to people. Those schoolyard things can be something that sticks with you 40 years later. It can still be what you actually remember of your childhood, is that, not all of the other good stuff, that it's still happening. And that to me suggests there's still a gap in knowledge and understanding, despite the fact that now I think we know it's unacceptable for the most part. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And all of that, I think, is a good way to start, I think, the story that follows about where I've come from and how that one experience has informed so much of the work that I've done and the life that I've ultimately led.
I'm kind of wrestling with whether or not to take this interview in a direction that I didn't plan on. But it's interesting, Jesse. You have my full attention while you're describing this experience that you had as a child, and you're talking about how a lot of these kids at this ball diamond maybe even weren't acting. I'm not giving them a pass at all. This isn't they were trying good things at residential schools comment at all. But I don't think that 10-year-olds were acting out of malice, out of a desire to scar a young boy for the remainder of his life. But you know what I'm thinking of as well? I'm thinking of a kid by the name of Bo, and I'll leave it at his first name. And I attended a private school for my elementary and junior high school in Southeast Calgary, in an affluent neighborhood, and quite frankly, my interactions with people of color, my interactions with people outside the gender spectrum, my people, quite frankly, that weren't evangelical Christians, my experience interacting with people that were secular was very limited. But there was this one kid, an Indigenous kid by the name of Bo, who attended our school, and his life was not easy, and we knew that. And a lot of kids used that as a jumping off point to bully him because his life was not easy. And he was involved in the care system. And I remember Bo as being defiant. And it dawned on me in later years that he was not defiant. He was summoning up the courage to show up every day. And I am personally, and have been on a journey, just appalled at how we treated him And I was part of the problem, and as many kids were. And so when we hear stories like this, when you're sharing this experience at the Ball Diamond, I'm having this visceral memory of, in particular, of a couple occasions specifically that I would do anything to change. And I've actually looked Bo up in subsequent years, and he's not on social media. And maybe the universe will maybe this interview will find him. I don't know. I would love to reconnect with him. I would love to make things right. In a way, maybe it's small R or maybe it's big R. I would love to personally reconcile with Bo and indicate how much respect I have for the fact that he just showed up to school for years. And I don't even know what the point of me. This almost feels like a cathartic exercise to be talking to you about this, Jesse. But I wonder, like, reconciliation, I guess, in some circumstances starts at a personal level. And I guess we can talk as well about what it means for the provincial and federal governments and the church and society writ large. But where do you think people's journeys need to start?
Oh, I think they can only really start at the personal level. And I appreciate your comments. I likewise went to a private school in a very affluent neighborhood in Toronto. I think I'm still to this day the only First Nations kid to have ever attended that school. And it was not easy. And releasing the book has been interesting because I've had some old classmates reach out who I have not spoken to in many, many years to express similar thoughts to what you're expressing. And that's been a complex thing to deal with because I wasn't, the intention of the book and the intention of my work is not to make people feel guilty or I wasn't looking, I guess the point is, Ryan, I wasn't looking for my old schoolmates to come forward with these mea culpas about how they could have been better or could have, because for me, and I think this is both true of some of these personal reconciliations, but also true of the sort of more larger framing of it, which is I've reconciled that already, and I sort of didn't need the other person to do that. And it's one of the things with reconciliation, especially when it comes to Indigenous peoples and our existence, our continued existence on our homelands that are now occupied by this other country. Is that reconciliation, even the big one, the one writ large, Indigenous people are already experts at it. It's actually not for us as a community. Because again, in one of the things I would stress is that we can't separate the physical word reconciliation from truth. They always have to be together, because if we do that, you might question what it is we're actually reconciling. And we have to remember what we're reconciling is the truth. And if we acknowledge that, then the point is, well, what new truths are Indigenous people having to reconcile in this moment? I don't think any. These are the truths we've been saying for many, many years at this point. So it's not on us to reconcile it. This is a period for us to heal. For us to heal, recover, regain, rebuild. And that sort of exists whether Canada or Canadians want to participate or not. Because that isn't the reconciliation process. That's the healing process. And we're gonna do that as communities. Now, it would be beneficial to us, but I would suggest perhaps more so to Canada and Canadians if they did participate, both in allowing us to heal, but also engaging in the work that they have to do, which is the actual reconciliation part. And even before we get to that part, I still think there's a lot of truths that have to be, I'm not so much told. I think a lot of them have been told. Like even I've had a lot of conversations about people about what they describe as the discoveries of the mass graves or the graveyards at the residential schools. But of course, they're not discoveries for our communities, Ryan. We've always known that they were there. The schools my family went to in Spanish Ontario, they were built with a graveyard there. Everyone's always known it was there. So not surprising for us. So again, I think the truths have been told for a long time, but there's always two elements true to truth. There's the telling of it, then there's the accepting of it. And I often relate these two processes to the process that many people are familiar with around grieving. And if you remember the sort, I think it's the 7 stages of grief, the last one is acceptance, which is the same with truth, which is that, and for many, hearing these truths will trigger a grieving process. And that's why acceptance aligns. Because I understand for Canadians, you're going to grieve a lot of things. Like as we have grieved, you're going to grieve the children, you're going to grieve not knowing, you're going to feel guilty and shame and anger and all those other stages, right? Of grief, denial. We've certainly gone through that stage in Canada, right? You're going to go through all of that because it turns out some of the things you're told or believed or thought were true just weren't really in the fullness. And again, I think a lot of our communities understand that because, again, we've been grieving these truths for a long time. So we have an advantage around that. Our patience, though, tends to, I think the tension that you get around, say, a book called Unreconciled or other Indigenous people pushing back, is that at what point do we have to say, like, that accepting of the truth, that the delay of it, that the inability to accept starts to become a strategic thing to never get to the reconciliation? And not only to get to the reconciliation, Ryan, but I increasingly say that there's actually another step that we're also missing, which is, if we consider reconciliation the sort of the idea that we'll figure out how to have a working relationship among our communities on these shared lands. Well, before we get there, I think there's the accepting of the truth and then considering the depth of harm done. I think there's another phase where, if you think about even your personal relationship, when someone has done real harm to you, is it just enough that they accept that they did the harm? And is it just enough that they go and that they then say, let's move on? Or do amends have to be made?
Well, let me ask you this, because there's a really interesting question, and it has a bit of religious phraseology here from Sandra, but I think that she asks the direct question that you're teeing up right now, which is, Sandra says, confession is good, but what's the penance?
Well, and I wouldn't frame it necessarily. I'm not a religious person, Ryan, as you might imagine. For various reasons, my family decided not to really keep engaging with the church after a certain period. But penance to me has always felt a little too close to punishment. And I'm not sure that's exactly what I mean. What I mean is restitution, or as some of my cousins, my Black cousins would say, reparations.
Yeah.
I mean that before we can really talk about how we move forward, we may have to be on the same ground, and that's going to take some effort. And the way I tend to frame it, and I realize that it's somewhat daunting for people, but I just think it's true, which is what we need to see is that Canada as a state needs to invest in the health and success of Indigenous communities and lives with the same vigor and abundance at which they took those things away. And if we were to actually measure the amount of resources, both human and monetary, that the Canada as a country has invested to deprive Indigenous people of their family, of their community, of their land, of their language, of their culture. If we think of the effort, and there's literally been careers made doing this. There are careers being made doing this right now. Cottage country, there's a whole cottage industry, quite literally, I mean that, in taking all of these things from Indigenous people. And that's been sustained over not just a single government, every government since Canada began has been engaged in this exact activity. Well, so that's 154 years minimum of multi-billion-dollar investment. That's a lot. That's why this question is so foundational, right? Because unfortunately for Canada, it got off, while it wanted to get off on a right foot, or it's always painted that it got off on the right foot, it didn't. It got off on the wrong foot. And until we correct that, it's going to be tough. And part of that correction is a return of, as so many of us say, we need everything that was taken to be returned. That's a lot. And that's going to take a lot of time. But that's probably what we have to look at. And I think it's important for your audience to understand that isn't really a threat to Canada as it is. Like, that won't deprive anyone in Canada of much of anything. In fact, what we have to switch, I think, is the historic notion, and this is true of all of the children states of colonialism, which is they have all historically and to modern day viewed the ongoing existence of Indigenous people as threatening to their existence. And that's what we have to flip, is to understand that it's the exact opposite, that the success of these, whatever you want to call them, settler states or colonial offspring states, whatever it is, the success of them is actually coming to grips with the First Peoples and actually organizing a proper relationship. It's that will actually legitimize them. It's the other thing that makes them illegitimate. And that's the struggle for Canada and folks to understand, is we have to do the exact opposite of what we've been doing. And that's tough. But I think the good news is our communities are healing. The children at these schools are returning now because our communities are ready for it. Has nothing to do with whether Canada's ready for it, because clearly Canada isn't. But our communities are. And we should take tremendous strength from that, because we're still here, we're rebuilding, and we will gain back everything whether Canada comes along or not. I just think it's in Canada's best interest to come along.
We had an amazing conversation just a few days ago with Michelle Robinson. She hosts a podcast called Native Calgarian, and a great name. And we were talking to her about land acknowledgements in particular, but of course the conversation moved on from there. And she touched on a little bit on the land back movement and what she thought could be meaningful and doable. You might call it actionable ideas, including perhaps crown land. She talked about hundreds of thousands of acres. I mean, just vast amounts of crown-owned property that could be part of initiatives in the context of reconciliation. We've had conversations on the show about First Nations investing in projects, in particular a new power plant. It's a natural gas, a really neat initiative coming up here in Treaty 6 land. And we've learned a little bit more about some water projects in some First Nations. Obviously, a lot of work to be done, but some work has been happening. There's a ton of talk in Alberta. It almost, I just feel like the energy leaves my body when I acknowledge it, but around Alberta's curriculum rewrite now, but I know that it's on people's radar. I mean, these, we talked to the chief of Delorme of Cowessess First Nation. He talked about sovereignty when it comes to child and family services. And obviously there are, within the justice system, there are some contexts to explore there. These are examples, I think, of when you ask Canadians or Indigenous people in Canada about what reconciliation might look like, or what an indicator of an appetite or a willingness to move toward meaningful reconciliation looks like. These are oftentimes bullet points on the list. Is there something in particular that you think provincial governments, or in particular this federal government, could do right now without delay that you would look at and say, now we're talking?
Well, I mean, I would actually, I think some of the things I would love to see is what they could stop doing. Would be a place to actually start. I mean, look what's going on in Fairy Creek, for example. I know the Prime Minister often talks about how they're not in court against Indigenous children, but they are in court against the representatives of Indigenous children. So I don't know the game of semantics that we really play on that. Like, there's some things that they could just stop doing altogether. Crown land, I think, is a good one, because it's not a real thing. Crown land, like, that's the crown does not own any of that land. That's a myth that's made up. So like that's just territory that's probably not really Canada for the most part. So like for sure you could look at some of those sorts of things. I think the biggest for me, I think it's key to understand that Indigenous people are not equity seeking, they're sovereignty seeking. So how can we start to imagine what that actually looks like in institutions? And while we're probably not at the place where we can actually have a discussion around real sovereignty for our nations or a return to that at this moment, I think we can discuss how we can get more self-determination around the decisions made for our communities into our hands and allow for us to start to, because again, what I would say is our communities are recovering and rebuilding, and that is because we're doing it. That has nothing to do with because there was a government program set up to help us do it. That's not what's happened at all. We're doing it outside of those things. So while we have seen some gains around government policy and programs, they're, small potatoes in terms of the larger issues. But I would love to see them stop doing things. I mean, one thing right off the bat is given what we're seeing in Fairy Creek and what we've seen all over the place, it is far beyond time that we have a real discussion about what exactly is the point of the RCMP. And is it really at all that different from when the RCMP was established as an armed force to control Indigenous people? That was the goal of the RCMP when it was established. And I think, Ryan, in 2021, is there another thing that it does other than that exact same thing in like 100 and whatever years later? That's not good. Like that's basically, at this point, the RCMP is less a police force, I think, for our communities and more an army, a military force that comes into our territories. And I would really love the government to think about how we could reinvest some of the money it currently spends on the RCMP and frankly, maybe our military as well, which has largely been used to further global imperialist actions. We cannot do that. We could decide to do other things with all of those resources, and yet we give billions of dollars to the RCMP and the money every single budget. And I think it is far beyond time for Canadians to hear our communities say, we should question that, because when the RCMP comes in and abuses Indigenous protesters, they are doing it on your behalf. And are Canadians really comfortable with a paramilitary force invading non-ceded territory to exert control? That is, well, you could talk what that would be viewed on the international level, how that might be viewed.
We're so grateful for your time, Jesse, and I want to thank you for staying with us here and well past the time that we asked you to stay. Let me ask you in closing, do you have confidence that the 10-year-old kid, Indigenous kid that's standing over home plate at the baseball game today is going to have a different experience than you did, say, 30 years ago? I mean, do you see signs that somebody might speak up? Do you see? Are you encouraged at all by any progress?
Sorry, my phone went off and I didn't want to give you some weird audio. Okay. I do, and it's because I get to spend, I have 2 teenagers, Anishinaabe teenagers. I get to talk to youth. I see how they're approaching it, not just Indigenous youth, but also the young people that they're around. And so many of the things, I watched your very fascinating conversation with Florence before I came on, Ryan. And, for the kids, like so many of the issues that we're debating are settled for them. Like trans issues, they're sort of not having those discussions like we are. And so like we sound like dinosaurs to them. Like when we talk about reconciliation and these things, like they're so ahead of us in terms of their thinking and where they're going. So I have extraordinary confidence. What I worry about is that we're giving them a lot to deal with because they've got the collapsing planet and all this sort of other stuff to worry about, that we still have an obligation while you and I are our age to help a little bit, to at least try, because we've failed them. And one of the things I often say to people is like, these kids, like I know my kids, they're going to ask me what I did about a whole bunch of stuff. And they're going to ask, I suspect, fairly soon. And they're going to want to know what I did. And I've been working really hard to make sure I have an answer for those kids. And I guess I would urge everyone that if we also figure out that we're all going to have to answer to our own children about what we have done and what we didn't do, given what we know, that if we all actually start working now to have those answers for them, they will be in a much better spot. There's some they may not have to ask because maybe we'll have proven that we've done. And I think that's what we should take the energy that they're showing us, that they're giving, and we should feed off it and say, right, because everything we're doing is for them anyway. So let's make sure that we make it easier for them. And I have just look at what's going on with Indigenous people in what is currently called Canada. Despite everything, despite all the horrors, Ryan, you and I could go through in a day, we're flourishing. We're getting back so much of what was taken. That should give us the strength to know it's all coming back, and we just have to play our part in it. And I often also keep center that my ancestors wanted Canada to work. They didn't, they embraced the newcomers. They signed the treaties thinking that this could work, that they knew that this land was abundant, that it could support, as long as we live in balance with it, it could support all of us. I want to honor that as well. So I haven't given up on Canada despite everything. And I think Canadians should actually know that Indigenous people, we've given everything to this country, literally everything. We're still here for it. But there needs to be, if you want a relationship, there needs to be a meeting somewhere so we can figure out how to do that. That's the process we're in. We can do it. Thank you, Ryan, so much for having me. I appreciate the conversations you're hosting on the show, the way your audience is interacting with it. Thank you so much for doing it. Miigwech, chi miigwech.
So honored to have you here, and so grateful for your perspective. Jesse Wente's new book, Unreconciled, Family Truth and Indigenous Resistance, already a national bestseller. You can find it anywhere you get great books. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm just sitting here, I'm like scribbling, and people can probably see if you're watching on YouTube as opposed to the podcast. I'm just like scribbling notes for my own purposes. I mean, we are not equity seeking, we are sovereignty seeking. That was like, boom. That to me is like, that's a billboard. That's a t-shirt. Put that on a t-shirt. That's like the thing you do. A buddy of mine always says, although he actually goes out and does it. He gets t-shirts stamped. Sometimes he just does a run of one, but something resonates with him, he puts it on a t-shirt and wears it around. I love it. We're not equity seeking, we're sovereignty seeking. If you missed our conversation with Eric Denhoff yesterday, by the way, about Fairy Creek, I encourage you to check it out. And we want to let you know that Brandy Morin, a journalist who is at Fairy Creek, has been in touch with us. We were hoping to have her on today. You know what the reality is out there, just to pull back the curtain here and let everybody know, is that they're having really spotty cell signal out there, and for Brandy and for other journalists out there, oftentimes they'll sort of at the end of the day go to file a story or go to upload the content that they've been creating or that they've been recording, and so we're working with Brandy. We're going to get her on the show as soon as possible. You can, in the meantime, can follow her on Instagram and on Twitter and see what she's reporting from Fairy Creek. And speaking of the RCMP, this has absolutely nothing to, well, I don't know, maybe it does, but with what Jesse was just talking about, did you see this story out of Alberta? You see that the RCMP union, all this talk about a provincial police force in Alberta, this is Jason Kenney's idea. Let me remind everybody, he didn't campaign on that. He wanted to remind everybody that Rachel Notley didn't campaign on certain things. Nowhere in the UCP platform was a provincial police force. I digress. The RCMP union, this reported by the Edmonton Journal, has applied to trademark a bunch of potential names for a provincial police service. So the RCMP union has trademarked Alberta Police Force, Alberta Police Department, and Alberta Provincial Police, the APP. The union admitting it is intended to be a roadblock. Pretty interesting.
Okay, that was my next question. Is like, okay, so why would they do that? And I guess that's exactly, when someone's website, they don't renew it. You go in there and you try to get it.
Well, and quite frankly, as is the job of a union, or as is one of the jobs of a union, in theory anyway, is to protect the job security of its members. And so why in the hell would the RCMP want to see, $200+ million pulled out of its annual budget to be diverted to a provincial police force? It wouldn't, is the short answer. So that was an interesting story. It's one that we're keeping an eye on. Sometimes we may not do a full 20 or 30-minute interview on something, but we want to let you know that it's on our radar and it is a story that we're following. Gosh, I knew Jesse Wente was going to be impressive, but I appreciate that. I appreciate his availability. I promised I was going to read 5 emails today, didn't I? And I've still got 4 in front of me. And we have a guest locked and loaded, ready to go in the bullpen right now. And we want to recognize a few of our sponsors and partners that make these conversations possible. So today's show might just have to run another 3 hours, I guess is what I'm getting at. But why don't we start by mentioning our Real Talk Wine of the Month. I've been telling you about La Crema and how excited we are to partner with La Crema. They've got some new additions to their lineup. They've got this Russian River Chardonnay that everybody's talking about, and then their Pinot Noir, their single vineyard Pinot Noir, which is certainly worth checking out. Well, it prompted a tweet from a Real Talker. We loved this from Issue. Issue said, Jaspo, La Crema is like one of my top 5 wines. My dad, who's a non-expert wine expert, I know a bunch of those. My dad, I think I might be one. Before we started evolving the language, you may have referred to us as winos, but we're not. We're non-expert wine experts. And so Issue said that my dad, who's a non-expert wine expert, introduced me to it more than 15 years ago. Someone's going to email me about saying wino on the air. More than 15 years ago, for years after he passed, I would buy a bottle. I would make one of my dad's favorite meals. I would celebrate his life and his love for me on his birthday. And so Issue said, that's a great pick for the first ever Real Talk Wine of the Month. Well, guess what? The team at La Crema saw that, and Issue doesn't know this yet, but they're sending Issue some wine. So now don't come at me with a whole bunch of tweets about La Crema wine expecting to see a box delivered straight to your door. But I thought that was pretty sweet. I thought that was pretty cool. They were moved by it, this vineyard. And then I met Sherbrooke Liquor the other day, which is just a fantastic store. And what do I see on the shelf? But that La Crema Chardonnay and then that beautiful Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir that I absolutely love. And not because I was in there and not because it's the Real Talk Wine of the Month, but they had the hidden gem sign right there. They noted it, their staff, as a hidden gem. You can find La Crema wherever you buy fine wines, whether it's Sherbrooke, Costco, Wine and Beyond has it. If you don't see it in your store, ask for it. La Crema has our stamp of approval. We also wanted to remind you how proud we are to partner with the team at Westworld Computers. I was in there just a couple of days ago talking to Daryl. Daryl's dad started the business 41 years ago now. Family owned, independently owned the entire time. Your Apple experts. Every time I go in there, I get nervous because my credit card starts, it's weird. It's like spend me. It's like rack me up. I'm looking around and I have the iPhone 12, but the 13 is in now. So I'm like, well, who needs this lousy 12? And I don't have a Series 7 Apple Watch, so I probably need to get one of those, right? And well, anyway, this is how my mind works. Luckily, I escaped unscathed, walking out with just what I needed, in part because that's what their team is so great at. But you got to, they'll upsell you too if you're looking for a reason to spend a few bucks. All the cool new stuff is in there, including that new generation, that 6th generation iPad, and of course the MacBook Pros that everybody's buzzing about these days. You can shop online, you can book service appointments online, or you can visit them in person. All of the information at westworld.ca. We're going to talk about kids and finances in just a second, but let's get to a couple of emails, talk@ryanjesperson.com. I'm so excited to officially announce something coming up in November, so I'll do an unofficial announcement right now. This is the unofficial announcement of an official announcement coming up on November 1st. We have new, and Sam and Sarah don't even know this yet. We have now received in-house, at least to our shipping department, based out of beautiful Calgary, Alberta, new second-gen Real Talk mugs. Ooh. And they are not the fantastic ceramic diner mugs that you see Sarah, Sam, and I drinking out of on the show here. They're a new, sexy design. They're proven to make your coffee taste 44% better. This according to 4 out of 5 coffee roasters. And starting in November,
you're ridiculous.
We will be awarding, tell me something I don't know, the Real Talk Email of the Month. Oh. And every month, when an email really resonates, we'll set it aside. And at the end of that month, we will select the Real Talk Email of the Month, and one of you Real Talkers will receive an official Real Talk mug in the mail. And we're really excited about this. That's starting in November.
Mug mail.
Unfortunately, Kim's email will not qualify. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to read it today. Kim says, Jespo, I was surprised to hear you talk about your firing from the radio station for the first time on Tuesday. I kind of laid it out on Tuesday. And it seems that tens of thousands of people were pretty chuffed about it. And we're excited to see how that episode, it's funny, you know? It's funny how some episodes really take off. And Kim says, with you talking about your firing, and then you interviewed Eddie Steele, who got fired from the Edmonton Elks broadcast, the CFL broadcast last week. I have to wonder how unbiased these large media conglomerates are. Kim says, I feel that traditional media is influenced by corporations and political entities to an extent that the average listener, the average viewer, is totally unaware. And it's sad, really, because media should be independent and unbiased. And Kim says, and this is why podcasts like Real Talk will become more and more and more popular and well-respected. Kim says, maybe this is something to delve into a little bit more. Kim says, have a wonderful Mike Nickel-free day. Oh, thank you, Kim. I do feel like corporate influence on shows is really deplorable. And if you do too, send us an email that I can include in Trash Talk, presented by Local Waste Service. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, we have sponsors too. But not once has a sponsor killed content. And I'll say that with my hand on whatever you want me to swear on. It's not how we roll, and our sponsors know that's not what we signed up for. And so that's something, Kim, that we continue to commit to, and I appreciate you recognizing it. How about this one from Greg? Greg doesn't like me very much. He said, Jespo, I just listened. He didn't call me Jespo. He says, Mr. Jesperson, but it felt a little pretentious, but that's what he said. Typically, if somebody says Mr. Jesperson, they're about to tell me that I have changed their life in the great way, or they think that I am the dumbest mother. He says, I just listened to a portion of your interview with the new mayor of Calgary, Jody Gondek, and I couldn't quite get as excited about it as you were trying to display. What, you mean just because I had an exclusive the day after the municipal election with the mayors of both Calgary and Edmonton? Greg says, sorry, but I came away from it feeling like it was a huge pile of bullshit. What really capped it off for me was that piece, that bit about the mayor's top priority being climate change and the need to initiate a climate emergency, and how excited that you and apparently one of your listeners were. And then in the next breath, you're pushing and totally excited about, like kind of like a young teenage schoolgirl being so excited about her new pink dress. Hoyles loves that comment. Flying to California for a holiday. I guess flying is not a climate change issue. They must use pixie dust to power those machines. Greg says, I guess whatever fits the bullshit narrative that's being taunted these days. Anyway, continue on, Jesperson, but I truly hope that there are some people out there that can still think for themselves, that aren't just sheep, that mindlessly follow along with what I just heard come out of the new mayor's mouth and yours. Regards, Greg. Regards right back at you, Greg. And I appreciate you listening to the interview in all sincerity. I don't know if did I get super excited about Jody Gondek talking about declaring a climate emergency? I asked her, if you missed the interview, encourage you to check it out for starters. Both our interviews with Mayors-elect Gondek and Sohi. I think I was somewhat surprised I think my impression when I said, what's your first order of business? What's the first thing you're going to tackle? I mean, aside from the resignation of Councillor Sean Chu, which is another story we're following. Unbelievable. Did you see this? The revelation that surfaced just last night. Turns out that in 2008, police were also called to an incident where Councillor Chu was in a domestic dispute with his wife, a firearm involved. I mean, this is getting worse and worse for this guy.
Former wife, thanks.
I say it's getting worse for this guy. It's probably worse for the women that he's been abusing, but allegedly. I mean, that's the story we're keeping an eye on. The guy's got to go. I mean, you got to go right now. And so we're keeping an eye on that. But I think when Mayor-elect Gondek, former councillor, said declaring a climate emergency as their first order of business, I think my response was like, huh? Like that's pretty notable, especially for the mayor of a city that's been, with apologies to my hometown and the hundreds of thousands of people that do not work in oil and gas. Calgary certainly has benefited from oil and gas. It's been Canada's oil and gas headquarters since, arguably the 1940s and certainly the 1970s. So I think that I was impacted by her comment. The stuff about tying this to whether or not you can fly to California if you're concerned about the planet. These are the kinds of lazy arguments that people take. I mean, Greg's, accusing me and the mayor and you, real talkers, of being sheep that just believe whatever they heard. If you come across somebody that believes that there are only two choices, right? Care about the planet or whatever else, everything else is. In other words, if somebody says to you, oh, you're driving a car to work? Oh, you're heating your home this winter? Oh, I thought that there was climate change. That is a lazy, that's a disingenuous, that's a red herring laden argument. And it doesn't mean that we don't take these points into consideration. Like, for example, Greg, your comment may prompt some people to say, hey, as a family, as an exercise, as a challenge, why don't we try to have a carbon neutral summer vacation? What might that look like? And then you get the kids all strategizing about it. Scientifically, how could we decrease our footprint? Corporations are taking on things like carbon credits. I mean, even for us with our new studio, we're consulting with an engineer about how we as a show can pursue a carbon neutral status. Now, of course, someone like Greg may call that virtue signaling. But for people like us, we want to say we're in a position to influence. And we're in a position where I think we represent a certain perspective that is a reasonable, measured, evidence-fueled conversation or platform that tries to wrestle with and ultimately address some of the challenges that are facing us, like it or not. Ken Bosencool, who's been on the show before, he was a strategist for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He's a conservative commentator in Canada. He was on about, I guess it was just after the federal election with Max Fawcett. The two of them came on and locked horns a little bit, although they played way nicer than I thought they would. Didn't you think, Sam? I remember you made a comment about that.
Yeah, it was the nicest I've ever seen Bosencool and Fawcett be to each other.
Yeah, because they're really gnarly, dude. I mean, they're respectful on Twitter, but
they share barbs a lot.
They do.
Oh, yeah.
It's like Spy versus Spy for anybody that used to read Mad Magazine. It's like, that's what those two are. But anyway, I saw Ken Bosencool. He said, listening to Mayor-elect Gondek on Jespo. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. He said, she just said her first order of business as mayor of Calgary will be to declare a climate emergency. And then Ken just said, I'm just going to leave that there. He just left it without comment. It was the no comment, which is still a comment. Like how nonverbal communication is still communication. But we don't need to get into that.
And non-wine experts are the experts.
Non-wine expert wine experts
Yeah.
are the true wine experts.
Correct.
Or at least also wine experts. No offense to the sommeliers. But Ken's tweet just went nuts. Like thousands of people, by way of like, retweet, comment, engaged with that tweet. It was a significant moment. But that's the point. You think Mayor Gondek doesn't acknowledge that it's going to be a significant moment when the mayor of freaking Calgary declares a climate emergency? The question is, what does it mean? What does it do to the business community? Do investors get skittish? That's why I went, when she said it. And we'll see what happens in the days to come. Let's get to our next guest. We know that there's a problem with financial literacy, whether it's us, whether it's the generation before us, or whether it's the generation of future movers and shakers. Do we really understand our finances and the implications of taking them seriously or not? I think the answer is no. But let's find out what our expert guest will say. Pam Liyanage is the co-founder of MoneyPrep. She's got a 25-year background in financial services. She's also a mother of 4. Pam's company has just developed a new video game app to teach kids about money management. You can find it in the App Store, Google Play, anywhere you get your apps. It's called MoneyPrep. Pam's making her Real Talk debut this morning. It's so good to have you here. Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the time.
When we were teeing up your appearance here on the show about an hour and a half ago, I said she's got a 25-year background in financial services, and then I said, and maybe more significantly, she's a mother of 4. It seems to me like I'm picturing Lady Justice right now with the 2 scales. And when it comes to financial literacy, you care for more than one reason.
Yes, that's exactly it. My company is kind of the convergence of both of those worlds, being a lender and a retail banker, and also being a parent and raising financially responsible kids.
So how did you, as a mom, out of the gates, decide to or have an influence on how your kids understand finances?
Yep, I have an influence on them primarily because of my lending background. So when I was in the banking system and saw clients coming in all the time from the 18 to 25-year-old age range, the common situation that I was fixing for them stemmed from a mismanagement of money. So it all comes back down to budgeting and understanding those basics of how to manage your finances, how to navigate them, understanding credit and how it works. And if kids don't learn that early enough, then it can become a problem for them as young adults. So that's kind of the genesis of what we're building. And as a parent, why I started teaching my kids from early ages of 5 and 6, because that's, the time to start when they have the longest runway to really form those smart money habits.
Can we talk about, because I know that, we know for a fact that there are, parents that are expecting that are members of our audience. There are parents of young kids. There are parents of teens, of course. And then, of course, the lessons in financial literacy can continue and many times often begin in our adult years. But can we do like a 0 to 6, a 6 to 12, a 12 to 18 kind of journey through what you think need to be the pillars of financial literacy?
Yep. The basics of starting from the beginning are framing discussions about money around where the kids are at. So in elementary, the age 5 to 12-ish, you ask a young child, what is money for? Their answer is always, you need it to buy stuff, right? So their framework around money is around transactions and what you need it for. So that's what I would say for that age range is the place to start when you're opening the discussions, talking to them about how to make the right decision. What do you need to think about? How do you make the choice? What habits do you really want to start instilling early so that they get to a point where they can start making some independent choices? And making mistakes is totally fine. That's part of learning. And it's probably better to make fiscal mistakes when you're, in elementary than when you're in a young adult. So non-catastrophic failures. So that's what I would start with when they're young. And as they grow older, then you can get a little bit deeper into the meaning of money and how to navigate and the obligations surrounding it. Like you get into the teen years and now they're starting to think about independent living and what do I need for school. And so at that point, you can get a little bit deeper and talk to them more about credit cards, how to manage them, why they're important. Because, I remember going into university and not having any discussions in the house, in the family home about money and how to manage it. And there's tables of credit card applications, right? And these young kids are coming in there, or they're 18, 19, and they're picking up these credit card applications, not understanding really how to use them and how to manage them properly. And then that can lead to, future consequences for them, borrowing power and things like that if they start messing up. So if you can introduce those kind of management techniques and skills a little bit earlier than, just a webinar or a few exercises in high school, then they're going to be much better off when they actually enter the real world.
The idea around credit cards, you're so right. I mean, people apply. In university, there are all these hooks, where they'll get you, and all of a sudden, for somebody, it might be a credit card debt of $750 or $1,000 that it becomes this pervasive debt that hangs over their head. For some people, it might be $15,000 or $20,000, and it becomes something that they can't manage. So then, in some circumstances, and I wanted to circle back to a word you used. You said, you've been in the lending industry. We oftentimes hear that phrase, the predatory lenders.
Yeah.
Right? These high interest lenders. And there's been some interesting developments with regards to different levels of government and how they're approaching that and how the general public feels about the so-called predatory lenders. Does the lending industry, let's acknowledge that without lending, most people wouldn't be able to even consider have a house or have a car or whatever, start up a business, quite frankly. So does the lending industry have a bad name, or does the lending industry, maybe in a more focused question, have an obligation to help educate their customers?
Absolutely. I think they do have a corporate responsibility to help steer their clients in the right direction. But the idea of lending being a bad word is it's a difficult one, because really, like you said, it's not a bad word. It's something that almost everybody uses in their life to get to their big goals. So it's just a matter of framing it differently so that people don't view lending or their lender or whoever they're going to borrow from as the big bad the big bad lender. That's who's going to help me get to where I want to go.
When you talk about how to reach kids, and obviously I think that almost with anything in life, there will be obvious exceptions, but like if you learn something young, I think of people that can speak a second or a third or a fifth language, and you go, how do you possibly do that? They go, well, I started young, and it's just like not a thing. Kids can just do that. There's this ability, the way that their minds work. Now, when you were putting together MoneyPrep, and people can check it out, by the way, at moneyprep.com. And again, you can find this. It's like a video game take on understanding money. You can download it on the App Store, get it on Google Play. What did you tap into with regards to the psyche of the average kid, or how a kid's mind works to drive home the most important points?
Yep. This comes from also being a parent and being in the classroom. So when I started the program, I did it workshop based. So I was going into the classrooms. I was doing a lot of kind of fun activities and games with the kids in person. And, we kind of quickly realized that if I want to reach thousands of kids out there, there's only one of me, and carbon copying isn't an option right now. So let's go digital. And the idea was, we know that kids love tech. We know that they love to learn that way. So we're meeting them where they're at. And we took the concepts of what we wanted to teach and the gamified versions of that I was doing in the class, and we put it online. And so it's getting a lot of traction, because that's the way kids are learning. And especially with the boom of online learning now. You might have heard of this thing called the pandemic, and teachers and parents are all looking for resources online and digitally. So that has also helped us to connect with those kids in a way that they enjoy and in a way that they can actually gain some valuable knowledge from.
Pam, it's interesting. You talk to different people about their upbringings, and some people would have no idea how much mom or dad makes, no idea what parents paid for the house, no idea what they owe on the house, no idea what their credit card balance is. And then other families, there's, probably the mail gets opened from Visa and it goes on the table and everybody can see where the money is or how deep the debt is or whatever the case is. Do you have a personal opinion, or is it family by family on talking about? I would imagine a lot of parents want to sort of insulate their children from feeling any sort of stress. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why you don't talk about money in front of the kids. Right. But is that an 100%. Old thing? Is that old school thinking?
Well, that's definitely a generational thing. I mean, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I didn't grow up with it being talked about in the house.
Not really.
And I know my parents didn't grow up with it being talked about in the house. But I think that is changing. And I think it needs to change. You know, it's okay to share the good, the bad, and the ugly of your situation so that the kids can learn from it. Because sometimes the insulation doesn't help. You know, I understand you don't want to put any worries or extra kind of stress on your kid. And that's totally, I understand and respect that. I think that there's a balance there. So you can still be honest and open with them, where you might not have to tell them exactly, you know, your annual income and everything like that, if you don't feel comfortable with it. But if you do, go ahead. You know, the idea of understanding, hey, everybody needs to budget, no matter how much money you're making. We all have limits and we all have obligations, and that need to get taken care of. And I think sharing that with kids helps them in their own adult life when they're setting up their own, money portfolios and whatnot.
How do you approach as a mom and as someone who obviously advises others on their finances too and understands it? How do you approach like the early stage stuff of, you know, whether it's the piggy bank or maybe a weekly allowance or chores that you have to do? I mean, these are obviously all opportunities to instill good habits or a solid understanding of finances with young people.
Yeah, there's lots of different approaches to allowance. There's one point of view that says if you set it up so that they do a certain amount of chores to get their pay at the end of the week, that's kind of the salary model. If there's another idea out there where you create a value for a job and just post it on the board, and when a kid feels like they need money and they're short, or they want to go to the movie theater, or they want to do something else that they need extra money for, then they'll look for that work. And so that kind of is the entrepreneurial way of doing an allowance. So it depends family to family how you want to do it, or if you want to do it. You know, the big idea in terms of opening the conversation for kids is just sharing your decision making, sharing why you're doing your choices, how you're making your choices, and that for the allowance age kids will, regardless of whether you give them an allowance, will set them up for creating those good habits.
Love it. I know that a lot of people are going to be really grateful for this, Pam, because obviously everybody wants the best for their kids.
Yeah,
and I
sure.
think a lot of us have, people have attended the school of hard knocks when it comes to getting finances back on track, right? For a lot of people, you get to the point where whatever step you've got to take, for a lot of people, they'll look back and say, gosh, I wish as I was on the concourse at the hockey game applying for a credit card because I got a free t-shirt. This is personal testimony.
Yeah.
I wish somebody would have talked to me about how there's a better interest rate out there than 28%.
That's right.
And how going for dinners you can't afford when you're 19 years old isn't always the best play. The game is MoneyPrep. You can find it at moneyprep.com. Helps kids create and build strong money habits. Available for ages 5 through 12. Developed by Pam, who's joined us, Pam Liyanage, and grateful for it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, Ryan. Great to talk to you.
You bet. You as well, Pam. Thanks so much. I was looking and I knew that our live chat would be going off, and it is, and it's great because everybody's, people are in all different situations, coming at this from different scenarios. I mean, not to be rude. Why am I saying it's rude? It's so hardwired in you not to talk about money, not to be rude, but no, it's a fact. And we know this because of our question of the week. Put out by our research and strategy partners at Y Station. You answer a few questions for us, just demographically. Give us a sense of where you're at, like physically where you're at. Are you in Alberta? Are you in Ontario? Are you an international audience member? And a lot of you divulge to us what your family or your household income is. And we know that there are people that watch this show or listen to the podcast every day that earn a modest income. And we know that there are people that enjoy a more significant, a more robust income, you might say. And so all these conversations will land differently with people, right? Tracy says, I got into debt because of credit cards. Credit cards I started using that I applied for in line at university registration. That's where they'll get you. It's where they hook you. And then all of a sudden it's 28% and it's $1,000 and you can't pay it and you can't make the minimum monthly payment. Then you hear about balance transfers, and then you balance transfer, or you hear about, Money Mart. You see the commercial, everybody piling into the Jeep. We're going to Money Mart. And then you end up, we're going to get sued by Money Mart right now, but it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. There's a lot of you get I'm not trying to pigeonhole the problem here, but you get people oftentimes, single parents or people that find themselves in a situation where they've lost their jobs and they need a little cash infusion to keep the lights on, literally. And then you've got these interest obligations that you're never going to be able to get out of. And governments have taken steps to legislate against these predatory lenders because they're so damaging to people. I think right now it makes sense for us to read some of these comments, right? Like Patrick says, I focus on teaching teenagers about awareness, like habits and how marketing works and what credit is. Patrick says you need awareness before you can control yourself. I've been teaching Wyatt about a certain fast food restaurant that puts toys in the boxes that they give kids. And I said, Wyatt, they're trying to trick you. I said, they're trying to trick you into wanting to go get a toy, but they know that the toy's just going to break and the food's not healthy for you. And every time we go past one of those restaurants and their iconic sign, he says, Dad, there they are. They want to trick me. I say, they do, kiddo. They do. They want to trick you.
I just find it I get such a sense of relief to know that was so many other folks' experiences where we did not talk about money. It was rude, very rude to know what my folks made annually.
Did you ever dig around to try to figure it out?
No, I didn't want to get in trouble. No way, Jose. We didn't get allowances. So it's interesting to hear that model of either doing a salary or doing, project-based.
Mm-hmm. That was my parents. That resonated with me.
Yeah.
And it was funny when Pam brought up the example. She said, so if you want to go to the movies, that was specifically what it was for me. And so my mom, would set up those types of jobs. And I was always grateful for it. It was kind of the first real opportunity that we had to, I remember as a kid, if you're 12 or 13 or 14, to be able to get $20 was a big deal.
Big deal.
But it would be, you'd have to dust the upstairs and the main level. You'd have to vacuum all the carpets and wash all the floors. And then that in exchange would be $20. And I remember once my parents extending me credit. Ooh. I remember specifically what it was. I don't remember what I needed the money for, but I remember that it was specifically $60. So it must have been something cool. It's probably new basketball shoes or something like that. And I remember my mom saying, okay, that's like 3 full, dusting, vacuuming floor jobs. That's 3 full ones. And she had me sign. It was like a note card, and we signed it. And then the next time I went to the well for $20, she was like, nope. You owe us 3 of these.
Right.
So work it off. And then once you work those 3 off, then you can borrow again, or you can go earn again that $20. That's very basic stuff, but it's not basic in the sense that it forms your understanding of there's not just this endless tap you turn on if you need 20 or 40 or $60, right? Jillian touching on religions where you're not technically allowed to borrow money or pay interest, which is true. Yeah, it's true.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Friends of ours, it's their scenario, right? It's why they're not currently homeowners. Scott says our idea these days, how much debt is okay, is so different than 40 years ago. Our reliance on debt to fuel our lives is extremely dangerous. That from Scott. Meantime, Craig says, I'll catch up. By the way, everyone, Craig's got to go to work. Signing off our live chat says, I guess I'll catch up on Eat Your Words after my meeting. I can't wait for that. Well, Craig, this one's for you. Craig, you're done all your work and you're now back with us hours later. And we're so happy to have you back, Craig, because every Thursday, thanks to our friends at Prairie Catering, we offer somebody an opportunity to eat your words. And today, it's a special municipal election edition of Eat Your Words. Now, this one's going to take a while to hash through because you, en masse Real Talkers, kept sending us more and more and more and more and more examples all along the same lines. Thanks to Sam Brooks, technical producer of this show, who took approximately 17 hours to load up all of these tweets.
Yep. Let's do it.
Let's get into it. You know how the municipal elections went in our home province of Alberta on Monday night. Let's tee these up, Sam. First, out of the gates, a while ago, this was, in fact, June of 2020. Amarjeet Sohi, at the time, he'd recently lost his brother. His wife was fighting cancer. And he said, folks, I'm taking a break from Twitter for a bit. And that prompted the recently re-elected Conservative MP out of St. Albert, Michael Cooper, to say no one cares after Millwood's voters resoundingly showed you the door which you richly deserved. Just a real class act, that Michael Cooper. And then there was this tweet that you passed along to us. This was from Mike Nickel, who recently, you may remember on Monday, got his ass kicked trying to become the mayor of Edmonton. Taking on Andrew Knack. Well, that's weird because the two weren't running against each other. As a matter of fact, Andrew Knack didn't do anything to deserve this. But last October, Mike Nickel said, this council has squandered the generosity and goodwill of our people. The people are speaking loudly. Andrew Knack has disappointed me the most with his obscure fascination with bizarre and wasteful projects. Andrew, it is time for a change. What? What did Andrew Knack do to you, Nickel? The answer is nothing, of course. And then there was this one. What about this one here? Andrew Knack keeping it classy. What does he do? Basically the same day. Happy 7-year election anniversary to Bev Esslinger and Scott McKean and Mike Nickel and Michael Walters and to Michael Oshry. Although he's no longer on council, it's been a pleasure working with you, and I thank you all for the opportunity to learn from each of you. Is Andrew Knack too nice? That question for another day. Let's get to our next tweet, Sam. How about this one from Mike Nickel? This was in March of 2021. For months, he said, I've been hearing from others that Andrew Knack and Amarjeet Sohi are deciding which one of them is running for mayor. Is this true? If so, make sure you're transparent with the public on any terms of the arrangement. Okay. And then, right around that same time, Mike Nickel's out in Andrew Knack's constituency. He says, my team was in a certain neighborhood yesterday in your ward, and they received feedback from a homeowner who lived there. He said, he's seen you campaigning, and he's seen you on council, but he hasn't seen any improvements in the neighborhood. And he shows a picture of some cracks in the sidewalk, because that's what city councilors are responsible for, is repairing cracks in the sidewalk. What's Nickel doing in Andrew Knack's riding, posting photos about cracked sidewalks? Unbelievable. And then there was this. Jeez. This one here, someone replies to Mike Nickel and says, Andrew Knack doesn't care about anything unless it involves the LRT. He needs to resign to put this city closer to being great again. Ugh. He says, I'm embarrassed to say he's my councillor. Andrew Knack replies, thank you for the feedback. I'm sorry that you're embarrassed by me. If you ever want to discuss your concerns in detail, please give me a call at... And then he puts his phone number out there in public. He says, so we can chat, and thank you for your comments. The guy goes on to basically say, well, we gone back and forth before, and a phone call with you would be a complete waste of my time. And Andrew Knack replies and says, even if we don't agree, a phone call is always useful. This is why people like me get really sick of bullies punching Andrew Knack in the face. This is the root of a lot of this. But wait, there's more. What about this one from Mike Nickel? Again, he's talking about, the idea around defunding the police. And he says, I like this comment from a guy by the name of Steve Weston. Steve is running in Ward Nakota Isga against Andrew Knack, and then he promotes Steve's website. You'd be saying, who? And I would say, exactly. Next tweet, please. Here's the next one. Mike Nickel now taking shots at Michael Walters, who was on our show on Tuesday morning. Michael Walters, of course, was caught on a live mic. He said, I'm so sick and tired of this motherfucker, Mike Nickel. Mike Nickel says he's advocating for political violence, and it's beyond wrong. He says, oh my gosh, these guys are hypocrites. He says, thank you, by the way, to Tony Caterina, former Edmonton councillor, for highlighting how severely biased the code of conduct process is at City Hall. Thank you to the councillors who did the right thing. What do Mike Nickel and Tony Caterina have in common? Both of them got their asses handed to them on Monday night in the election. Sam, next tweet, please. We would expect, of course, that Alberta's Minister of Justice, Alberta's Solicitor General, would stay the fuck away from the election. You would think so, but no! The Honorable Casey Madu, Alberta's Justice Minister, fundamentally, he says, I appeal to you to reject Trudeau's agents at Edmonton City Hall. I ask for those who mean well for our great city to unite, to save our city, and to set it on course for economic prosperity and renewal. An endorsement from the Justice Minister for Mike Nickel. But I'm not done yet, because there's this one too. This one from Mike Nickel, who said, today was an odd day. This was in June of 2021. We're taking you chronologically through all of this. He says Edmonton Council voted 7-6 to follow the medical advice of our top 2 doctors and the mask mandate. Common sense was winning, but, and here comes another pile on, Aaron Paquette and Andrew Knack, neither of them running against Mike Nickel. Both of them won, by the way, Monday night. He says they were losing, but then here came the push. And then he pushes this out. Neither of these guys are running against him. He says it's time for change when it comes to councillors Knack and Paquette. What do you think? Well, since you asked, Mr. Nickel, here's what I think. I think that time and time and hang on, let me just check my list here. Time again, you were a real jerk to a whole bunch of people, and the people have spoken. Mike Nickel, as you lick your wounds and fade into obscurity, may I invite you to eat your words. Presented by Prairie Catering. Our friends at Prairie Catering want you to know that if you're considering hosting your team or your company's holiday party at the Art Gallery of Alberta, they have facilities that can accommodate your group, including sensitivities around distancing and everything else that's on our mind these days. You can also book them to cater your team's holiday party, from in-person buffets to these boxed heat and serve meals that are the new rage. You go, hey, listen, we can't gather in person, so instead we're going to send everybody a heat and serve gourmet meal to their homes and have a Zoom party, a virtual party. Prairie Catering nails it. I've been part of one of those. They hit it out of the park, and they're excited to introduce a brand new menu exclusively for the holiday season. You can find them online at prairiecatering.ca. And if you have a suggestion for Eat Your Words, we want to encourage you to pass it along to us at talk@ryanjesperson.com. Gosh, I love that music bed. I was kind of wishing there'd be more tweets. I mean, not really. That was enough. That was more than enough. But it was just like
it's the longest Eat Your Words we've ever done.
You kind of get into a groove. I was trying to make eye contact with you, Sam. Like, are we about to run out of tunes here? Is the band? Is the Real Talk Studio Band about to stop playing?
Is Paul Schaefer winding down right now?
Paul Schaefer works here? We actually did run out of tunes, and I'm just so good you didn't notice.
Nobody noticed that you did such a good job with the fade and the reload and the loop.
That's the thing about Brooks. When he does a great job, you just
don't know.
Notice.
Brooksy's got the kind of job where you sit there and you say, this is where you know that they're doing their best. You know they're doing their best work if you don't notice it, right? Which is the case with a lot of people that deserve recognition. Stefan sent us an email. The headline, the subject line rather, grabbed my attention. It says the removal of Sean Chu. And so I opened it. This is the city councillor. Just to refresh you, if you're listening from elsewhere in Canada, or if you're maybe not paying hyper close attention to what's going on in the city of Calgary, a city councillor just narrowly achieved re-election, but it's going to be a short-lived tenure at City Hall. There's no possible way this guy can stick around. I mean, you may say technically or legally there's a way that he can stick around, but people will refuse to work with him. I guarantee it. Who would work for him? Like, can you imagine he's hiring a chief of staff, or he's going to hire a communications assistant? Like, really? You're going to work for the guy that's been accused of some pretty horrific things, including in his time as a Calgary police officer, sexually touching a minor, bringing a minor to his home, firearms involved. I mean, this is a disaster. And Stefan, as I opened the email, I realized that he wasn't writing to me. In fact, he was writing to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, to Rick McIver, and he CC'd our show, which we always encourage you to do. So these emails are on the record. So the government can't deny that nobody's been talking about it, that nobody's been reaching out to them. It's why we have entire email folders where we have literally thousands of emails sent to the Premier and to ministers CCing us. And Stefan says it is unconscionable that somebody who has demonstrated this kind of unethical action while in a position of power over a vulnerable minor be allowed to remain an elected official in this province. Furthermore, advanced polling for the recent municipal election had concluded prior to this information being released publicly, which resulted in many voters casting ballots with no awareness of this information that would certainly have impacted their voting intention. Because Mr. Chu is not convicted under the criminal code, Calgary's city council is unable to take necessary action. We talked to Mayor Gondek about that. Stefan says, this could only be performed by the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and for this reason, I implore you to remove Mr. Chu from his position as city councillor. It is on the radar. There's a protest planned, as a matter of fact, for this Sunday, right, outside Calgary City Hall, and you can learn more about that online. I mean, just Google it. Just look for just Google Sean Chu, S-E-A-N, or search him on Twitter, and you'll see there's Twitter accounts that have been created to getting this guy removed. People have pointed out that the provincial government has been threatening to, or maybe at least flexing a little muscle when it comes to dissolving dysfunctional school boards or removing school trustees from positions. It's been suggested by some legal experts that there is a mechanism or a lever that the provincial government can pull here. Now, what makes it particularly interesting is that Sean Chu is a big backer of the UCP. The UCP has been, at least by proxy, with ministers, MLAs, prominent donors, supporters, party members, constituency association presidents, supporters of Sean Chu. I mean, people have provided evidence that Tyler Shandro, a minister, a senior cabinet minister under Jason Kenney's government, was a donor to the Sean Chu campaign. Now, I said this calls for some reason. To some degree, this calls for the benefit of the doubt. I do not believe that people that were donating to Sean Chu's re-election campaign knew about these, or at least I don't think that the majority of people would have donated had they known. So I do have mixed feelings. I don't know about the two of you. I do have mixed feelings about these donor lists being released and people saying, look at all these, like Tyler Shandro. Look, Tyler Shandro donated to this. You know, there have been circumstances where people, celebrities, politicians, or otherwise, have disappointed their fans, have disappointed people that have supported them. And I'm quite certain that the majority of people that are on that donor list right now are appalled to see their names being released publicly. This guy has become poisonous.
I understand that it's like, oh God, my name's on there, but at the same time, no, it's vital for democracy that we know who the donors are. It's just consider the optics.
Do you think it's fair that if I were to have a horrific scenario unfold where I,
oh boy,
it turned out that the church arsons, right, from a couple of months ago, that it surfaced that I was the guy that burned down the church in X community.
Okay.
Do you think it would be fair for people to go to one of our sponsors and say, looks like you support burning down churches? Do you think that would be fair?
Well, it's not true. And I think that's
but
critical thought.
But what is true is that I burned down the church. Okay, let me be clear. It's not true that I burned down a church. In this hypothetical scenario, let's say I was accused of arson. I was charged with arson.
Yeah.
Is it fair for people to go to those that have supported me and our show and to say that you are associated with this guy by way of sponsorship, so therefore you support this? Or you deserve to be held account for this?
I think it's important that people know who supports whom.
But I agree with you.
So
but my point is I don't think that people were supporting or would have supported Sean Chu had they known about this.
Well, absolutely.
Right.
I agree with that, but I don't think that is then an argument to say no, we're no transparency on the donor list.
Not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I'm calling for.
Thank you for the clarification.
I think we're on the same team here. I think what I'm saying is that I think there needs to be a moment of pause to recognize that people donating to the Sean Chu re-election campaign likely would not have and are probably appalled that they donated to a campaign that ultimately is standing to represent somebody who's received a pass after a track record of abusive behavior toward women, including minors. What do you think, Sam?
I think there's a couple things. Number one, donors lists. Two things have happened in this election. Okay, one of them is that companies are not allowed to donate as a company anymore, which means the donor lists are kind of weird to read because they're all individuals.
They're all personal donations.
They're all personal donations, even though we know a lot of it, especially the big ones, are corporate money. So that is, that is a policy created by the UCP to veil some corporations from being attached to certain candidates.
Well, except for that previously you could have corporate and personal donations, so technically business owners could donate twice. They could double up in past.
True. Yeah. But it means something different if you're going to put your name on it than your company's name. The second thing I was going to say is donors lists are released without timelines on them. Here's just a big list of names. And you don't know if they donated a year ago, 3 months ago, or a week ago. And I think that because we track everything with new revelations or new information coming forward, it's like everything kind of marches in this very linear time beat. Having that little piece of transparency on the donor list would do us all a big favor.
You know, I had a wonderful conversation yesterday that was off the record, and I'll leave the majority of it off the record. Let me say it was not the terms. Put it this way. If I would have said, or if this person, Greg Zeschuk, one of the founders of BioWare, a very prominent video game designer and a man who did an unbelievable job with his team, Ray Musica and the others, in building just an empire in gaming. It has now put his money into a ton of things, including this is about to get local to our audience members in Edmonton, but the development of the Ritchie Market, including the celebrated restaurant Bira, the amazing beer brand Blind Enthusiasm. Greg's done a ton of things. And it surfaced a while ago that he had made a $5,000 donation to the Mike Nickel for Mayor campaign. And Greg was getting piled on online. He was taking his lumps online. And he and I had a conversation yesterday because, of course, we wanted to let him know that the door was open to come on the show if he wanted to talk about it. And I'll keep our conversation private, except to say that I was so impressed with Greg's perspective. And you can find he has his own personal website where he did release a statement about it. And he's put so much thought into this. One of the things he said to me yesterday was that he said this has been such a good reminder for me and such a great opportunity to take pause and reconsider how I approach my philanthropy and how I manage my donations. And it was a big wake-up call for Greg, who admitted that he hadn't put a lot of conscious thought into it. I mean, he quite frankly says in his statement, which anybody can really read, it's a public statement online. He said, when I was working to open Ritchie Market and some of the zoning things that came up and some of the business barriers, he said that at that time, Mike Nickel, who was the councillor in that area, had worked to help us out. And so I donated to reflect that, he said, unaware of what that platform would come to represent. It's just another example, like you said, Sam, of timelines when it comes to donations. And for Greg, I mean, that was something that was problematic for him. I really, really think he deserves a lot of credit for how he approached that, and I encourage you to check out his public statement. We can tweet that out, or we'll push it out. Hoyles is I knew from the look on your face you were already doing it, Hoyles. Gosh, you're good at what you do, Sarah Hoyles. So it's something to think about, friends, and I encourage you to keep us in the loop on that. We promised 5 emails today. I've read 4.
I was going to say, what's the tally at?
We're coming up on one of the longest episodes of Real Talk ever, which means I should probably hurry my ass up. We'll sign off with S. McFury. S. McFury said, you know, folks, it's now been a couple of days after this municipal election, and I just finished watching a pretty exciting edition of Real Talk, your Tuesday show. And everybody's celebrating, it seems, these big wins in Alberta's 2 largest cities, Edmonton and Calgary. And it's amazing, and it really is. And Ryan, you made a passing reference a few times to the other cities who also saw big changes. And I tried so hard to feel the excitement that so many are feeling, but I am quite literally weeping as I write this email. On Monday, Lethbridge, a city of 100,000 people, experienced a devastating outcome as the result of a split progressive vote. McFury says, our election was an absolute shit show. 6 candidates running for mayor, 32 candidates vying for 8 seats on council. The mayoral list, too many progressive candidates failing to see the bigger picture. So this will get local for our audience members in Lethbridge. McFury says, had Sheldon Day Chief and or Stephen Mogden set aside personal aspirations and backed Bridget Mearns, she would have easily won. We could have had an incredible council. Instead, our UCP supporting mayor-elect Blaine Higgin won by 508 votes. And we're now under the leadership of the perfect UCP pawn in the municipal game of chess. He supports big-time spending on crime and policing. Remember, the Lethbridge Police Service has been under the microscope for a number of really problematic incidents, including, tailing a minister of the Crown, Shannon Phillips, and tackling a store worker dressed up as a stormtrooper on May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. They take down this stormtrooper because they thought that she had a firearm, and it was just, anyway, back to McFury's email. You know, this mayor was the champion who led the campaign against our supervised consumption service, against Arches. And he now sits at the table with 4 right-leaning councillors who make up a 5-4 vote, and it's a very big deal. In a city with the types of problems that Lethbridge has, humans will die because of the decisions that these councillors will no doubt make, but nobody knows how big of a deal it is because we are just one of those other cities. That from McFury. I hope that, if anything, this goes to show that we read the emails you send us, and this is a platform that we invite you to use to prompt conversation, to draw attention to issues that matter to you, issues you know that will matter to others as well. Before we sign off, I want to remind you that our friends at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge, for about the last 6 months, we've been acknowledging as part of these mentions that they haven't had the new car inventory that they've wanted. You've not been able to just walk in and buy a Dodge Ram if you were looking for something to pull your trailer this summer because dealerships across North America were experiencing shortages. Well, guess what? The shortages are over. And October is their biggest sale of the year. And right now, or at least at last mention, they had over 330 Dodge Ram 1500 pickups for you to choose from, over 150 Jeep Grand Cherokees. They've got Wranglers and Gladiators and Challengers and, of course, everything else in that Jeep and Dodge lineup that makes them the best sellers across Canada year after year. You can find them online via the sponsors tab on our website, ryanjesperson.com, or go see them in person for the biggest sale of the year at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Our friends at Local Waste, I know, are getting excited for tomorrow. That's because another edition of Trash Talk is coming up here on the show, proudly presented by Local Waste Services. It's construction, commercial, and residential waste and recycling collection. You can request a quote today, whether it's a one-time bin that you need for a renovation project, a yard cleanup, or whether you're a business owner looking for a better deal with your waste management provider. They do it best, they do it locally, and they operate independently, family-owned at localwaste.ca. Our friends at Friesen Brothers are getting super excited, I know, because Oktoberfest is upon us, and that means that you have a chance at select stores in Stony Plain, Fort Saskatchewan, Drumheller, Hinton Hill, Peace River, and that stunning new store in Edmonton on Saturday, October 23rd. That's this Saturday from 4 to 8 to participate in an Oktoberfest feast. You do not want to miss this. You can learn more about what it entails, what's on the menu by visiting Friesen.com. You can link to their website again under the sponsors tab on our website, ryanjesperson.com. Coming up on tomorrow's show, I'm really excited for it. Our Real Talk Roundtable. We are going back to back. It's back-to-back Jacks. We're going to talk to the winner's circle when it comes to the recent municipal elections. 3 pretty high-profile new councillors across the province will join us, plus ADHD in adults. How much do we know about it? Coming up tomorrow. We'll see you then.